This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com.
You hunt big game too?
I have, yeah. Yeah, I haven't hunted big game in about 4 years now, but I've shot a lot of deer, antelope, elk, bighorn sheep, ewe, bears, and I train dogs and I bird hunt. That's what I do now. And so that's
Go buy some
pigeons.
Podcast.
What's that?
We already
Do you buy
Hold
pigeons?
on, wait, let's start recording because she's
We pitched her earlier on this.
Talk about the hunting in the podcast.
I might bring that pigeon down here in a couple days. Let him walk around up here.
Is it a homer?
You build a little roost for him in here.
Is
Yeah.
it pretty tame?
It's extremely tame.
Oh, nice.
What all it tries to do is get into the house
You're kidding me.
because it knows people are in the house.
Oh,
Did you raise it?
My kids did, yeah.
It's not going to be a shooter then, right?
No, he got a pass. 40
Clemency.
of his roost mates went to bird dog trainers.
Right. Yeah. But so what's his name?
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter.
Because there was peanut butter and jelly, but jelly
Gone.
had to get euthanized.
Yeah.
It had a health problem. Had a congenital birth defect, as far as we can tell.
Come on. You really did euthanize it. You didn't train it to, yeah.
Well, it started passing its own intestines.
Oh my God.
Yeah, real buzzkill.
Oh,
gross.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Brody's over.
Is Peanut Butter aware of the windows outside?
It knows where the door
killing
is.
windows?
Yeah, but it knows where the door is. It goes to the door.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Oh,
so does it live outside?
lives outside.
Oh, nice.
It's at a bird sitter's house right now.
Did he fly over there?
I know it shouldn't be like, hey, can you let the pigeon go so it comes back home?
This is the start of the show. We're already rolling.
Oh.
There you go.
Perfect.
Give me your book.
There you go.
Phil, where's a good spot?
That's a great spot.
That looks good.
Yeah, we're missing the bottom quarter of the cover, but we've got the title.
It's just me. It's okay. Cover
There
it
you
up.
That's better.
That's better.
Joined today by Diane Boyd, who came on the, you were on the show a while ago.
Probably 5 years now.
5 years ago, way back in episode 166 days.
Okay.
That was a great episode.
Thanks. You made it great.
We did an episode called Hunting with Teeth with Diane Boyd. Lay out your, can you lay out your an abbreviated form of your resume so people know what you're all about?
Oh, golly. Yeah. I started working with wolves in Minnesota in 1976. I was just a child prodigy. Not really. I'm just old. And anyway, I picked up Minnesota wolves. I worked in wild wolves in northern Minnesota. And then I worked for one summer before I came to Montana as a depredation control trapper and research caller in northern Minnesota. And then I moved to Montana in 79 to pursue a couple of graduate degrees. And I basically started with the first wolf that walked down from Canada and have maintained wolf recolonization information all those years. So kind of from the first wolf to 3,000 wolves now. That's what we got in the West, roughly.
Got it. And the reason I like Diane Boyd and the reason she's back on the show is you cut a lot of the hysteria and a lot of on each side. If I don't know, it's not right, especially in today's climate of an election season. I don't want to put it as the left and the right. How do you put it? The yin and the yang now? Okay. Can you see the book and my hand, Phil?
Yep.
If this is attitudes of wolves, and this is what this side is, that they're going to kill your children. Okay. And this side is that they snuggle fawns.
They're going to save the planet.
That they're gonna save the planet and reverse climate change. To Diane Boyd is, I don't want to have you be the middle finger.
That's a bad thing.
No,
but-
I like it.
Diane
'Cause
Boyd
that's
is,
like,
I'm going to move this finger over where
Okay.
the middle finger lives.
the middle finger's great because it's like,
Diane, yeah, she gives the middle finger to the sides.
I like that. Never had it put that way.
And she's got a new book coming out. A Woman Among Wolves, My Journey Through 40 Years of Wolf Recovery. When is it available? Right soon, right?
It's coming out September 10th. It's being released, and you can pre-order it on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. It's up there now.
Got it. My mom's husband, my mom got married after my dad died. My mom got remarried. Now that guy passed away. You know what he called Barnes and Noble? He called it Books and Nobles.
Well, that's okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It was McDonald's and it was Books and Nobles.
In case you forget later, I think you should ask Diane if she's going to read her own audiobook.
Oh, listen, I'm going to tell you. Are they letting you
warned
read your
me.
own audiobook? Don't have them do a person. Don't bring in a soap opera person. Who's going to do the audiobook?
It's got to be you.
Do you want to start a little bit? So, my Greystone Publishing sold the audio rights to a media company.
Yep.
And
Understood. That's normal.
They hired a professional actress to read.
Did you really come in there and complain?
Well, I didn't know that, and then when I found out, I just said, "Well, I know the story pretty well,
Yeah.
and I do a lot of public speaking, and I think I've got an engaging voice, even with my Fargo accent." So they had me send an audio edition, and they wrote me back, and they said, "Well, if you want to do the reading, we're going to have to basically train you, and it's going to take a lot of time, and blah, 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 blah." So
You know why they're telling you that? They got these hosers that do it all the time, okay? And they come in, they know they're going to get it done in 2 days, whatever. Don't let that happen. I let that happen before, and I've mentioned this a bunch of times. I let that happen before. I got the thing in, I turned it on, and I could not cross the room quick enough to turn it off the minute that person opened their mouth.
oh dear.
Because, like, you live your work,
Yeah.
right? And when you're writing it, it's you know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
doing it, you're saying it, you're reading it to yourself, you're making it perfect.
Yeah.
And then some other person picks it up and touches it. It's like watching, it's like, are you married?
No.
If you were, it would be like watching someone handle your husband.
That was an impossibility. I was married briefly.
Okay, so you
I get it.
yeah.
I get it.
Picture that you were still married, you really liked him, and you had to watch someone else, right?
No go. But anyway, the other thing was they're doing this. They want it to be done when the book is released on September 10th. And I'm going bird hunting. I mean, I got stuff to do, and I actually just don't. At this point, I just threw my hands up, said whatever.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
whatever.
Understood.
Okay. Thank you, though.
Next time.
Next time, next book.
You appreciate the advice.
Yeah, I do.
Whitetail Week coming up here at MeatEater. 1 week only, 9:30 to 10:06. Whitetail Week's the best time to stock up on whitetail gear with deals from First Light, FHF Gear, Phelps Game Calls, Dave Smith Decoys at the MeatEater store. Plus, a full week of whitetail content. We've done these in the past. It's like, there's a TV channel that they celebrate a fish all week every year. It's like that, but it's for people that like whitetails. Oh, you know what's funny? I'm working on this new project, and we got to do a bunch of scuba diving over the last week, and we had these underwater. It's like you can talk underwater. It's a special mask. Like you normally use you have like a breathing apparatus and a regular mask, but it's this big contained thing, so you can hold a button and like talk underwater to people. It's hard to be heard, and it's not a perfect system, as you can imagine, talking underwater. And so we rented this equipment from this place that rents this stuff out. And they're like, well, how in the world on Shark Week are they all talking to each other underwater? He goes, oh, they dubbed that all in. This is you folks will appreciate this. Sometime between mid and end of September, The Fucked Up Old Shitters calendar is out. It's the third in our effed up series. We did deer stands, taxidermy, and now it's shitters. Some of the world's best
And worst.
Not best.
Best worst.
Yeah, the best of the worst old shitters laying around out in the woods. From the Arctic to the Midwest. And probably point south.
Did you do captions this time?
Oh, yeah. Great captions.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't
Great
know that
caption.
I'd say that they're all the worst, because some of them are just intriguing. Like you'd want to give them a run.
Yeah. Carved out of giant tree stumps.
Mm-hmm.
So like one is sort of, I don't know what the hell, it looks like a giant redwood or a sequoia or something. I don't know what it is. Probably not. No, it's a cedar. A huge western red cedar. That's what it is. And they carved a shitter out of a western red cedar.
That's beautiful.
So in the caption process, we sit around thinking of what would be funny. And we're like, something to do with Ewoks would be funny. And then you work that into a caption. There's one that is very southwest. And when I looked at it, I thought of the Alamo.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you work up a caption that's like a joke about the Alamo. That's how that process works.
Are there any outhouses or shitters that you wouldn't want to stop? Oh, there are.
Yeah. There's
but
some
there was some
some
gross
there's
stuff.
I'll tell you the one I wouldn't want to do.
The one
is
in
that-
need of an upholstery job. I wouldn't touch that thing until someone's recovered
There
it.
was definitely some that made me lose my faith in humanity, like gross, like stuff laying
that didn't
around.
make the cut.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Yeah.
gross about the calendar.
No, there's no like, ew.
No,
But we had some gross submissions.
Yeah, a lot of gross
yeah.
submissions.
There was-
None of our submissions has. None of the submissions are like poor etiquette. None of the submissions. There's no toilet
no
paper.
fecal matter.
There's no fecal matter.
There were
It's
there
just-
were a couple that you guys didn't see that were being used. The people sent in.
Oh, you cut those out?
Yeah.
No people
Thank
in
you.
it.
Thank you.
I didn't think they'd make the cut, so I didn't send those along.
It's 12 months. That's how many months are in a year. It's 12 months of beautiful photography of if you were wandering around out in the woods or wandering around up in the Arctic or wandering around wherever, and you came across a old shitter and you're like, God, the stories that old shitter could tell. That's what this calendar is all about.
And they're all shitters you'd tell someone about.
Oh,
You're like, you wouldn't believe what I found.
oh yeah. If you were hunting with your buddy or whatever, and you went off to go check on something, and you encountered one of these shitters, and you came back, I don't care if you saw two booner bucks fighting and stuck together. You'd run back to your buddy, and you'd be like, you would not believe the shitter I just saw. Oh, plus, there's two booner bucks stuck together over there. That's the quality of these shitters.
Like recently, it was last hunting season. I was up on the Rocky Mountain front in that Augusta Shoto zone. Randall seems like you've been to every bar in every small town in Montana, so you've probably been to this one. But in their bathrooms, they have pictures of some outhouses, and one of the favorite ones I've seen, it's you can see the front, but the outhouse is out in the flats, and it's got it looks like two telephone poles that are wedged like between its like upper corners at the eave and the ground. Just basically meaning that the wind blows so hard there that if this outhouse isn't supported with telephone poles, like, at an angle,
It's going to lift it off.
Yeah, or at least knock it over.
There's one
It's
in the
funny you
calendar
mention
that
that.
was brutalized by the wind pretty good.
Yeah, there's just
They
you
needed
kinda-
those telephone poles.
You're looking down a hill and you can just see the shitter blown off away. We also had a lot of tandems, and we only put one tandem in because I don't really understand. Like when my little kids were littler, I could see them utilizing a tandem.
But you wouldn't park next to Janis
But
in the
even
morning.
now, they're not going to utilize the tandem.
Right.
I know of a use for a tandem outhouse up
Oh,
the north
please.
part. So my first year up there in 79, got Giardia, and there was a 2-seater outhouse. And there was a moment one day when I needed to use both holes at the same time. Just saying.
Yeah.
Do you know what the next installment of Effed Up
I want to do, it's a photographic challenge. I want to do fish cleaning stations or just fucked up old fishermen.
Or fucked up hunters.
But I'd like to do fish cleaning stations, just the nastiest, grossest fish cleaning stations. But it's hard to capture the smell.
The one at the
if you
shack.
remember scratch and sniff when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah.
If you could scratch and sniff old fish cleaning stations,
If
so
we
you
could
could scratch
figure
it.
that out, we'd hit the.
The one at the
Scratch it,
shack's
smell.
too nice now after the fix-up job.
No, it wouldn't even be good anymore. I know we got ruined for that. Yeah, I'm not sure, but this one is great. If you know someone
We're
that
open
just
to ideas.
appreciates an old outhouse. Oh, one of these old outhouses that got caught on fire and put out. And I was trying to think of a Taco Bell joke.
Fire sauce.
Too many flaming hot Cheetos.
But I think on that one, the joke landed around like it was from Southeast Alaska. And I think the joke was something about how hard it is to get anything to burn in Southeast Alaska. Like nothing wants to burn there. So how would you get, some kind of joke like that. A couple thoughts from Heffelfinger on a past episode. It's a rebuttal. It's a retraction. It's actually not. It's a fortification. But Heffelfinger had a good quote. It's not his quote. He wrote it down. A retraction never gets the traction of the reaction to the original action. Once again, a retraction never gets the... From the top. A retraction never gets the traction of the reaction to the original action. A great illustration of that would be when it came out, two I can think of. Years ago, it came out that like a guy supposedly died from eating squirrel brains. And then it was that was everywhere. Every news agency picked this article up. And then it came out, well, actually, no, he just died of a brain disease, and in his past, he had eaten a squirrel brain. So of the 100 or 200 people that die of this every year, he happened to, in his history, had eaten a squirrel brain, and it just didn't quite get the traction of the reaction to the original action. I was commenting. I used to always tell people. I used to somehow it was told to me that automobile insurance companies often push to reduce deer numbers so that to reduce their premium load from all the claims made from crashing and cars hitting things. So agricultural interests, and I would say automobile interests, automobile insurance interests would like to suppress deer numbers. Now, Heffelfinger, I don't know where he hangs out. He's saying automobile insurance companies, plural, have told Heffelfinger personally they have no interest in spending any money to reduce auto collisions because they just run the numbers and charge whatever premium they need to cover collisions with deer. While they want to spend time or money on something that might reduce deer collisions like overpasses, when they can just simply take it into consideration when they do all their math. They pass it along to the consumer. Also, so Heffelfinger commented on that. Heffelfinger commented on this. We were discussing a plan taking root in Oklahoma and elsewhere of taking, this is a little bit complicated. There are some whitetail deer farmers, whitetail deer ranchers, whatever the hell you call them, that believe they have some deer that are resistant to CWD. Meaning they'll have a population of deer and some deer just don't get it. And they're saying, hey, we should take these deer that don't get it and seed wild populations with our resistant deer in the hopes of sort of speeding along or making, these deer have a gene mutation that makes them not so susceptible. Let's put them out in the wild, and hopefully they'll breed with wild deer, and eventually we'll create this CWD-resistant wild deer herds, which just strikes me as like incredibly dubious. Heffelfinger says, deer with that genetic combo are not resistant to CWD. They just don't die as fast. And it's not a good thing to have CWD positive deer running around for a longer period of time in the environment, shedding infectious prions. I can't remember if I decided on prions or prions. What do you say, Randall?
Prions.
Okay, that's what I'm going to stick with. The Pandora's box is that when you intensively select for those CWD-related genes in captivity, you are also selecting for other genes that are close to them on the same chromosome. Genes that are physically close to one another on the same chromosome are inherited together at a higher rate. We have no idea what those other nearby genes are. They might be genes that lower reproductive rate, produce smaller antlers, a higher susceptibility to other diseases, tameness, who knows? It's just a bad idea to circumvent natural selection for a lot of reasons, and this would never move the needle on CWD spread or prevalence in the wild. These genes associated with deer surviving longer with CWD are in fact increasing in frequency in the wild populations through natural selection, but very slowly. Steve's point is right. Ha! That's my favorite part of the letter.
That's what
I don't even know what I said. It makes me feel like when I, once every 5 years, and I go bowling and I always get like at least one strike. Steve's point is right, that releasing a few more of those animals from captivity is not going to change gene frequencies in a free-ranging wild population and has the potential to do harm. He goes on to say, if you like Sonoran hot dogs, Guero...
Which I do.
Well, I think that's what he's talking about. Who's going to take a stab at this? Guero
Canelo.
Guero Canelo?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Top 10 in Tucson. Number 1 in his opinion, but prices have gone up in a way that exceeds the quality of the food, he says.
No. Guero Canelo is where I always take you. He's giving you another option.
Yeah, we plugged Guero Canelo in a trivia episode.
Oh, and he's saying La Cerrita del Roro is a better Mexican hot dog.
I think it's La Carreta del Roro, but you're close.
Is that's in Tucson as well?
Yes, where the Sonoran dogs are famous, and it looks way different. And I think you can. Didn't he read what goes on there and what is? Or he wrote. Sorry.
But, yep. Jim, if you Jim's got his eyes on a good Mexican hot dog. Another rebuttal. This is a rebuttal from Bubbly Doug.
We're going to eat them in January.
Heffelfinger and Bubbly Doug are sort of the main rebuttal generators and clarification generators.
But this is from Doug / like a friend.
Doug's friend.
They're ganging up on you.
Doug's friend is very annoyed about something I said about CWD. And I've said this, and I've said it before. I don't know if I'll say it again, but there's a point I often make. And it always irritates some people. But I say it because it's a true feeling that I have. In discussing chronic wasting disease in deer, I often say the thing most scary, this is not what I say, but I'm trying to say it in cleaner terms. What's horrifying to me is that some hunter out there, it horrifies me that some hunter out there would contract CWD from a deer. And it would jump the species barrier. And so because it's so alarming to me and so scary to me, I'll often say that I'll put some statistic around it where I'll try to say, I might say something to the effect of 90% of my concern about chronic wasting disease is it's going to pass to some hunter's going to get it. And if it were to jump the species barrier, it would just change deer hunting. It would change deer management. It would change deer hunting. It would change the perception of deer. Like, we put a huge cultural value on deer if they were this thing that was causing, like these sort of like horrible, prolonged deaths from like prion diseases in humans. I mean, it's just disgusting to even think about. So when I when I follow news about CWD and try to advocate on behalf of research around CWD and trying to stop the spread of CWD, a huge part of my motivation is that, like, it just makes me sick to think about anyone my kids, whatever, somehow doing this and how it would affect my diet. That's kind of like the main thing I like to eat is deer meat. This does not go over well with some people. And Doug's friend, who's a landowner, farmer in the state of Washington, she says, if Steve's biggest concern with CWD is the potential risk to humans, it feels contradictory to the values he often expresses as a conservationist. You can be a humanist and a conservationist at the same time, but back to the letter. It gives the impression that he values animal welfare less than he claims, which stands in contrast to his usual counter arguments against vegans, that he likely cares more for animals and understands them better than they do. It's frustrating to hear him repeatedly say that his greatest worry is the disease jumping to humans when animal welfare is at stake right now. It's not just Doug who's upset about this, me too. And she goes on as well to counter my observation that another thing I've said about CWD, and then I'm going to leave the subject behind for a minute. Another thing I will frequently say about CWD is how can it be, or why is it that I'm so afraid of it jumping the species barrier to humans? I would feel that livestock producers would be more afraid than I am. Because, as I said, a cow and a sheep look a hell of a lot more like a deer than I do.
All you got to look at is like what happened with mad cow disease in Britain, right? Like imagine that across the entire United States.
Correct. What it would do to the cattle industry.
Yeah.
And this person is countering, she's saying, I don't think they're not worried about this. I can't really do a tit for tat on that issue. I understand what you're saying about animal welfare. I'm just telling you a thing that like for instance, when my kid's out playing in the road, okay, and I get nervous that they're chasing that they go to chase their baseball across the highway without looking, and I'm like, man, the main thing that worries me about my kid chasing the ball across the highway is that my kid will get hit by a car. Someone would say like, well, that doesn't go with your view as a conservationist, because why are you not so worried about the deer that get hit on the road? Aren't you worried about animal welfare? I'm like, yes. Not as worried as I am about my kid getting hit on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I read this as like the only thing you're concerned about is humans, but
it's not what I said.
I know, but that's what it kind of sounds like she's saying here. Like you can be concerned about humans and worry about the deer herds too.
Yeah, when I see a deer run across the road, I was like, watch it. And the other day I was driving down the road.
But
and the driver, I freaked out on. I was in the passenger seat, and I freaked out on the guy. I'd be like, "Slow down, dude! How do you know there's not more?"
I think that she's just. I think it's a she. I don't know why I think that.
Well, because
you said her name already.
Because of her name, and the fact that he says she.
But I think she's pointing out that maybe there's a constant omittal when you talk about CWD about that part.
I always qualify that part.
I also think it's hard to. I mean, the CWD is going to be a lot worse for deer if people get it from deer. Like if you're concerned about deer as a whole, if it jumps the species barrier, CWD is going to be a much worse outcome for our whitetail populations as a whole. Mule deer
and if it jumps the species barrier into cattle, and all of a sudden we have to have the same conversations about deer and CWD as we do about free-ranging buffalo and cattle because of brucellosis. And people are like, hey, man, if the state owns the deer, keep those deer away from my place.
Yeah. It's a much darker picture for not only people, but the health of deer as a whole, if that were to happen.
And I don't omit the other thing. The same way when I'm driving or I'm riding in the car and I see a deer cross and I see that the driver that I'm with isn't thinking about how there's probably some following it. And I was like, dude, slow down. Come on. But if I saw a kid run across the road, my reaction is going to be even stronger. I'm going to get out and yell at the kid.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly normal to be more worried about your kids than deer. Than you are worried about like the welfare of a deer or deer as a population.
I do worry, yeah.
Let me ask you this.
I think it's pretty valid.
If I could guarantee you that it would not jump the species barrier, but you could get rid of it by snapping your fingers. Would you still get rid of CWD?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the,
of course.
That's
and
the
listen,
thing. It's like you can be worried about one thing more than the other, but still have concern for CWD as a problem for deer.
if we could spend money and get rid of EHD and blue tongue, I'd be like, oh, let's go spend the money and get rid of EHD and blue tongue.
Yeah.
It's like it upsets equilibrium and causes a lot of trouble for deer hunters when their area gets wiped out. It's like rags to riches on deer populations where you get a lot of deer and all of a sudden you're like, well, we got a lot now, but now that we got this many, just wait for EHD to come through and then they'll all be laying dead on the side of some pond. I would still think we should spend a bunch of money. And like, here's the thing too, from their perspective, that's the reason I'm always advocating on research. Like knowing that there's that risk out there, study the hell out of it. Mm-hmm. I think there should be a lot of money getting pumped into studying it. It's not like that perspective is not adversarial to wanting to control what's going on. Who wants to talk about wolves?
Me.
Everybody.
Where do we start? Let me ask you this question. Can I remind you of something you told me the last time?
Oh yeah, sure.
The last time you were on the show, and I want to pick this up and have you extend that logic. I want to see if you still feel that way and if you would extend it to Colorado and just run with this. You said something that surprised me when you were on the show before. You had said, had we never did, we humans, Americans, whatever, had we decided to not do a reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone National Park in the Frank Church Wilderness area, meaning had we not gone and live captured wolves elsewhere and brought them to turn them loose, we probably would have, I can't remember the exact way you put it, we probably would have eventually landed in the same spot we're at right now from natural migration.
Yes, I still feel that way. And so wolves are expanding globally in Canada. They're all over the Midwest, here in our West, Europe. And the only place where wolves have been reintroduced was Yellowstone and the Frank Church, Mexican wolves, red wolves. But wolves have globally expanded without any reintroduction. There's wolves in the Netherlands now. There's wolves in Denmark. Nobody put them there. Wolves have been getting there on their own. And the wolves did get to Colorado. They've had the first reproduction, I think it was 2020 or 2021 from Wyoming wolves. And those wolves ended up, a lot of them being killed. But they were getting there on their own. And I feel very strongly that where Colorado is at since 2020 is about where we were at in Montana in 1979, 80, when a few wolves started walking down on their own power from Canada and slowly got a toehold, so to speak, and repopulated on their own.
Can you mention the Great Lakes? Can you move over? Can we move over real quick to the Great Lakes and,
Sure.
and touch on that real quick? Talk about that for a minute. Like no reintroduction.
Right.
If we look at in the northern Great Lakes, we have Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a stable population?
Viable population? No. Isle Royale. There was a recent reintroduction to Isle Royale because the wolves had dying out. Other than that,
but
no.
that's still Michigan waters.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you give a little crash course on how were they ever gone?
No. Good question. So when I left Minnesota in 1979, working with wolves, there was just under 1,000 wolves, 900 to 1,000 wolves in Minnesota. There was a handful in Wisconsin, probably less than a dozen. There was maybe 25 in Isle Royale that had gotten there late 40s, early 50s by crossing the frozen Lake Superior ice. And that was it. And now I'm trying to think of the numbers of wolves in the Midwest. It's over 1,000, might be a couple thousand, 3,000. I'm trying to think.
Have they been extirpated from Michigan?
Yes, they're extirpated from Michigan and Wisconsin. They were never extirpated from Minnesota because the northern fourth or third of the state is too remote, roadless. So there always was a stronghold. And I'm trying to think.
You're not calling me a liar when I say that I saw a wolf track in the eastern UP in 1994, are
Nope.
you?
No,
Okay.
no. What I
So I'll
said.
fight you.
No, absolutely. I'm saying viable populations, breeding,
Okay,
reproducing, established packs. No, because my friend Dick Thiel was documenting wolves recovering to Wisconsin, starting in I think he saw his first wolf track in like 72 or 73.
see.
They were trying. In Michigan, same thing. And actually, there was a reintroduction into Michigan, UP,
What?
in 1970, 74, 78, somewhere in there, 74. You can read about it. It's in my book. And they took 4 wolves from Minnesota and they transplanted them, reintroduced them to northern Michigan. It was just before deer season.
Did they really?
And they eventually, all 4 were killed pretty quickly. So that
By what?
people, guns.
Animal rights people.
Feeling sorry for them in the Michigan winters. So that was actually the very first wolf reintroduction that I'm aware of. And people don't often know that.
Who did that reintroduction?
It was like the state. DNR.
Was it real hot politically at the time?
You didn't know about it. I'd say no, it wasn't, right?
There's no internet?
Right. No internet, no Facebook, no social media. So it was done. They were held a little while in a pen, and then they were let go. And that was the model for how they were going to reintroduce the wolves to Yellowstone. So Yellowstone, Idaho, wasn't the first reintroduction. Michigan was.
They took them from Minnesota and put them in Michigan.
Yes.
I'm from Michigan. I didn't know that.
Google it. Try it. Michigan wolf reintroduction if you want. Well,
Do
anyway.
you mind doing that, Brody?
Yeah.
So, and look in the 70s, I think 74. So, yeah, but none of them made it. And it wasn't that they didn't know how to hunt or didn't know how to find their way around because they're wild wolves. Just that too many people with guns.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, you asked. That was the first. And then, of course, our wolves were coming down into Montana from the North Country, from Canada on their own.
What year were they? So in the Rockies. So let's leave the Upper Midwest out of it.
Yeah.
So we'll go from like the 100th meridian west or whatever.
Okay.
Right? In what year can you say with some certainty there were no wolves south of the Canadian border?
In the whole West, you mean?
In the whole West.
Well, the statement, so wolves have always trickled down. So I can't say there was never a wolf, but in terms of a viable breeding, surviving.
Well, no, I want to hear about that a little bit.
Okay, so they say generally by the 1930s, wolves were extirpated as a viable population in the West. But I know of individual people, like what you just said, who saw wolves, wolf tracks, a wolf. There was a wolf shot in Glacier Park in 1953. There was another wolf shot outside of Polbridge in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
There's individual shot. They get run over. They show up. But in terms of a viable reproducing population, 1930s is pretty well the date that they've chosen.
Okay. But from 1930 up until the area we'll come to focus on, like when a viable population came, at any time along that, there could have been singles that would come down from Canada.
Yeah, and hearing from people who live over on the Rocky Mountain front, the Blackfoot Indian Reservation, Glacier Park, it's pretty remote, inaccessible, Badger 2 Med, and people have seen wolves there more commonly than other parts of Montana. And then, of course, they don't survive in eastern Montana because they got nowhere to hide. They show up, boom, they're dead.
Got it.
So there's been a little bit, but not reproduction.
Okay. And then when did they start coming down and getting a foothold, and how did that work? We keep using toehold and foothold, which is there's I don't know. Is
And don't forget
ironic
leg
the right
holds.
word?
Leg holds. Anyway, one of my better tools. Sorry.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A failed attempt by Northern Michigan University and the Michigan DNR to reintroduce 4 wolves to the Upper Peninsula occurred in 1974.
See?
Eventually,
You're
wolves
all smart,
moved
Brody.
Eventually, wolves moved from Wisconsin to Upper Michigan following strong prey populations in the early 90s. When did you see that wolf track?
I saw a wolf track in 1994,
There you
Eastern
go.
UP.
Yep.
That corroborates your
Yep.
your story. Try and trap.
Right again.
It's not far from the final resting place of my dog, Duchess.
Wolves got her, huh?
Nope. 2 guys named Ben and Matt got her.
Oh man.
Yep.
Oh,
Well, they were supposed to.
Oh, I got you.
She was crippled up.
Oh,
Gotcha.
sorry.
Got her's not the right word.
thank you for the background.
Good job, Brody.
Thanks.
So the question was?
From 1930, around 1930, there's no viable population of wolves left in the lower in the American West.
Yeah, they even went in the parks with poisons and traps and rifles and killed all the wolves inside Yellowstone and Glacier and all the parks. Yeah, they were pretty well gone. Coyotes didn't disappear, but wolves did.
Why is that? Why did coyotes stick around?
I think because they're smaller, they have a higher reproductive capacity, they breed more often, they're breeding in smaller units, and people weren't so focused on eradicating coyotes. You know, you see a wolf, by God, we've got to kill every last one. A coyote, like, well, whatever. It's just doesn't generate the emotional impact of hatred.
Gotcha.
What about Mexican gray wolves? Were there always some north of the border, or had they been eliminated also?
So interesting. So the Mexican wolves were basically eliminated, except in Mexico, and there were a few into the Southwest, Arizona and New Mexico, right at the border area. They captured every last one that they could find out of the wild. Roy McBride went there, and I think the last wild capture was about 1970s, early 1970s. And they moved them into captive breeding facilities to help build up the species. But their founding population was 7. There's a lot of genetic concerns, obviously, with a bottleneck of 7. So they're always managing and manipulating them to try and maximize genetic diversity, including taking pups from captivity at a young age and then finding a den in the wild where the mother's got wild pups, and they'll go sneak a couple of the captive pups, like 10 days old or however old,
Really?
in with the wild ones because that has the desirable genetics. Yeah, I mean...
What's that bird that does that?
A cowbird, right?
Yeah.
They call them a parasite, though, instead of an improvement.
Okay.
Right? So the Mexican wolf, they were pretty well gone. And interestingly, one of my first years in the North Fork, I think it was 1980, Chuck Jonkel brought up a Mexican carnivore biologist, Pepe Trevino, and he showed me a Polaroid, photograph he brought up of a wolf. It was like in a barn or a shed. And he said, "Is that a wolf?" I said, "Well, yeah." He says, "And I know it's a wild one because this is a Mexican wolf from the Chihuahua area of Mexico. And it was coming to a ranch, and it was a male wolf, and it was bringing deer legs and meat to the ranch dog who was a female unspayed because it was the last mate choice out there." And they ended up, the rancher could have just killed it. Everybody did. But he did, and he called some authority, said, "If you don't come take this wolf away, we're going to kill it." So they went and captured it and held it in his barn until they moved it to the zoo. But it's kind of a sad story, right?
Yeah,
the very last one. Yeah.
We played this on this podcast some time ago, and it was some bird from, I think it was some bird from Hawaii. And it was I can't remember, it was some bird species, and it was just down to one. It was down to a male or a female. And this bird species would duet.
I heard it.
Yeah. And so they have this recording of the last bird, let's say it was a male.
Yeah.
The last male of the species doing the duet without accompaniment. Because he does his part and then you wait and the female's supposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was gone.
I heard that. It's kind of tears at you a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard a guy named Frank Glazer?
Old pilot. Different guy? That was Don Glazer. No, I haven't.
He was he has a book called there's a book about him called Alaska's Wolfman.
Huh.
And he had gone up to Alaska very early and was a market hunter for people building roads and people building railroads and whatever, and eventually just became this very accomplished hunter. And at the time they were trying to do economic improvement for Eskimo groups in Northwest Alaska. And part of this economic improvement plan was to introduce reindeer herding, which never really took. So as they're trying to go into Eskimo communities, and the feds are trying to get Eskimo communities establish reindeer populations, but they're having a hell of a time with wolves. And so Frank Glazer in addition to a lot of aerial gunning, was doing bait operations. And he would go into an area and get them.
Poison bait?
Yep. Strychnine.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be able to go get them all.
Yes.
In his book, he talks a lot about all the other stuff that would turn up at the bait pile. A lot of stuff. But it was so effective. He doesn't talk about its effectiveness with poison this way. But it was so effective. He has some anecdotes in there where he gets them all. And then someone will say, there's this part of it where an Eskimo tells him that he saw, it's like 7 come across the ice. And it was like 6 white wolves and a black wolf. And a couple days later, he goes to his bait pile. There's 6 white wolves and a black wolf at the bait pile. Just very effective.
Yes. Yeah.
And he even talked about you want to set it on a high knob. Like he's got he took like a real approach to it. Mm-hmm. You know, like he was good at poisoning wolves.
He's a good predator on wolves.
Good at poisoning wolves.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, poison is how they wiped the wolves out of the West. It wasn't so much traps and guns. It was poison. How else are you going to get every last one?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Yeah.
When they started coming down, what factors eventually led them to, what factors led them to kind of get a toehold? Was it ESA protection where people were more afraid to shoot them because they'd get in a bunch of trouble?
Yeah, I mean, Rachel Carson and, the whole wave of ecology and being environmentally aware started in the late 60s, and then the ESA came about. The Act came out in 73. I think the final version, wolves were protected in 74. And there was just a little change of mindset. And the interesting thing was that they would find the North Fork of the Flathead, right along Glacier, because back in the 70s, people like myself and other people, they just wanted to move to a quiet place where there were few people and could enjoy wildlife and have a simpler life. They weren't loggers or hunters or ranchers. Well, there were some, but mostly just sort of go back to earthers and have a better quality life. So they didn't mind wolves. And these wolves happened to find that valley, that corridor of tolerance. And that's how they found their way. It didn't work on the Rocky Mountain front. It didn't work in eastern Montana. It didn't work in Idaho.
Because of cattle.
Yes. And so they found this little zone, and they were able to, one came, and then 2 years later, her male came, and they mated, and then more wolves come down. But it was the tolerance of the local community that found wolves interesting and novel versus dangerous and threatening.
Where were you then?
I came to that valley in 1979. The first wolf that survived, that we got a radio collar on, Kishnina, she arrived in the fall of 78. We put a radio collar on her April 4th, 1979. And I trapped there for forever, just trying to catch more wolves. And there weren't other wolves until about 2 years later when this male came down and joined her. But the meantime, she wandered around looking for a female, like that poor bird in Hawaii.
For a male.
Yeah, looking for a male, right. Yep. And eventually found one, and they mated and had the pups and so forth. So that process they filtered down on their own 4 paws without any assistance whatsoever, and no fanfare, and no people from Washington, D.C. carrying crates in. They just walked down. And I think that's why they made it. It was just socially acceptable and tolerant because it wasn't forced on anybody.
Mm-hmm. You tell that story in your book.
Yeah.
How did you get a collar on that? Or was it collars at the time? Or
So the British Columbia bear researcher, Bruce McClellan, has been up doing bears. She's now retired, but he saw the wolves and wolf tracks, and he contacted Bob Ream at the university. And Bob hired a wolf trapper from Minnesota, Joe Smith, uncommon name, but it was Joe Smith. And he came out and set traps and caught that wolf. And then I came out in September to replace the crew that was there and follow her, and I was a trapper, and to try and catch more wolves. And that's kind of how it started. So she was already collared, although I know there had one neighbor who didn't really like wolves and said that I brought the wolf with me, which, or that a sled dog got loose. But you don't see sled dogs that are 3 feet at the shoulder with yellow eyes. I mean, it's just all this stuff. But that was how they got there. They walked. And she had to come a long ways because they poisoned off wolves in southern BC and Alberta in the Rockies, just like they did in the States, because they were afraid of rabies. And they started poisoning wolves in the 60s, late 60s. And so there was a zone.
They were at it late.
Yeah, there was a zone when there weren't wolves along the border. There weren't wolves in Waterton and Banff. So this first wolf, Kishnina, may have come from as far as Jasper, but she came quite a ways. We didn't have genetic resources back then to determine where she came from. Of course, now we could if we'd had a sample, but we don't have a sample.
Did you, when you say you were a wolf trapper then, were you trapping problem wolves too?
Yes.
You don't like talking about that?
No, I don't mind at all.
Or whatever word you want to use.
The book, you'll enjoy the chapter Northome in the book, but did you like the Northome chapter?
Yep,
so I started working with wolves as a starry-eyed, waist-length, blonde-haired, hippie wolf-hugging lady. And I came from the university.
Can you walk me through that descriptor again?
No.
Starry-eyed.
I was a bit enamored with wolves. I was a university college student. Dave Meach, who's like the wolf god, he's still working full-time at 86 studying wolves. He's published more scientific papers than anybody I know. Anyway, I got to work on his captive project, and then I got to go to northern Minnesota and work, and I learned how to catch and collar wolves and track them. And then I was hired as, a year after this, so I'm pretty early in my career, in 1979, I was hired as a livestock depredation control trapper and research trapper. So when there weren't wolves killing livestock, I went out in the forest and collared wolves that were just wild and added to the database for Steve Fritz, who's postdocing PhD stuff. So my job, picture you live in Northome. Picture you're a conservative guy from Michigan with a few cows and you have a few acres, and some young blonde gal is going to come up and save you from the wolves, right? I mean, it was a hard road to hoe. So that was my job. And I learned so much that summer. It was so important to my career development and having me be in the middle finger, as you described, of behavior, of public wolves reaction on my part. So there were truly farmers, they don't call them ranchers, they're farmers that had chronic depredation problems, and there were some farmers that had none. I worked with both. But getting into that community was real challenging. And I could tell stories forever about that.
How would you generally handle those situations?
Okay, example. I try to use, there's no point in feeding them a lot of scientific data. They don't care. You just have to work with them and develop a relationship. I use my sense of humor. There was, like, for example, I was working in there and I kind of stayed on my own and I tried to stay away from people, just do my job because I was young and inexperienced and I kind of didn't want them to know that, right? Well, one day I'm at the gas station, a guy pumping gas, they actually pumped your gas back then, says, you ought to pick up the local paper and see what Bing wrote about you. I said, well, who's Bing? Girl, he's like close to God. He writes our local news column in the weekly paper and he knows all the goings on. So I go by the paper and I open it up and there's Bing Elhard's column. And he talks about who visited who and what they were having the church bazaar at. And then he says, and by the way, we have a new community member. There's an attractive young blonde lady wolf trapper.
Quote.
And exact quote. And next to his words, he had a photograph of a 6-foot-tall cardboard cutout wolf. And he's got his arm around it and it's sitting outside at his house. And he says, lady wolf trapper, I have a problem wolf.
Oh my God.
Like, what do you do, right? I'm 24 years old. I'm like, oh my God. And knowing that how I deal with this guy is going to make or break my summer. So I thought about it really hard. I went home. I took out a bunch of cardboard and tools, and I built a perfect replica of a number 14 new house wolf trap, complete with double long springs made out of cardboard and a fake chain made like your kids make the Christmas loop chains. And I wrapped it in black electric tape so it looked like it had been dyed black like a real trap. And I got a jar of my stinkiest wolf bait and I crammed it full of cardboard. And I drive to his house the next day and I pull up in the government truck. And he comes out on his porch and he kind of stands there and smirks and he crosses his arms and says, well, you must be the lady wolf trapper. And I said, yes, sir, I am. Pleased to meet you. I'm Diane Boyd. And he says, so you're going to take care of my problem wolf? I said, I am. And I walk around the back of my truck and I pull out this cardboard trap and the corrugated cardboard stinky goo. And I walk over and I say, so this trap and this bait I guarantee we will catch your particular subspecies of wolf that's causing you your problem. And I reach out with it like this. And he stands there and he looks at me like from me to Yanni, 5 feet away. And he just kind of stands there. And then finally he breaks into his grin. He comes over and he puts his hand on my shoulder, says, "Come on in. The wife just took a pie out of the oven." And I sat there and had blueberry pie with him and tea and coffee. And we chatted quite a bit. And the next week in his column, he put a photograph of my trap. And he said, "The lady trapper paid me a visit and my problem's taken care of." And you know what? He actually said some nice things about me in his column the rest of the summer. When I'd catch a wolf, he'd put it in the column. And so it's like, that's how I work in the community. You can't fight it. Just put your head down, think hard, and move forward and try and do something a little creative. Just as you asked, that's just one of the stories. But yeah.
Well, that's good career advice for everybody.
Just be a pain in the neck.
When that was happening and the wolves were coming down, let's talk about that scenario that you said, we might have eventually landed where we landed.
Yeah.
There's no way it would have been the same timeline, right?
Probably not. But, once we had our first wolf in 79, by 1995, without any reintroductions, just simply not trapping, poisoning, and shooting them, by 1995, just before they put the wolves into Yellowstone and Central Idaho, we had 70, 75 wolves in 8 packs with nobody reintroducing them. Documented.
Where were those?
Northwest Montana, Marion, 9 Mile, Kalispell, all through northwestern and western Montana. The Marion wolves became famous because they started killing livestock it was about late 80s. So they were there. And because nobody forced them out, they were just kind of existing in those wolves that caused problems. Shoot, shovel, shut up, and the other ones kind of left to be. So in the 90s, there were wolves dispersing.
Can you tell me those numbers again?
So the number of wolves?
Yeah, pre-reintroduction.
So by 1995, there were about 70 to 75 wolves in Montana in 8 packs. And if you go back to the old U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website, you can find the data there. It's published. I'm not making this up. I only talk truth, and my book is stories of truth. So they were there. They had collars on. Sometimes this one pack was giving a livestock producer problems, but mostly they were just making a living. There were wolves on the Rocky Mountain front. They were moving down, and they were as far as Missoula, the 9 Mile wolves. I'm sure you heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
So the wolves, before they reintroduced them to Yellowstone, there were 2 wolves that'd gotten there already, pre-1995. One was shot just south of Fox Creek.
2 had gotten to Yellowstone.
Yeah, and one was
own.
filmed. Yes, so that was like 1991, 92. So it's just like Colorado. Those wolves came from Wyoming and Colorado now, and they found their way down, and they began reproducing, and then the reintroduction happened on top of it, which is what happened with Wyoming, with Yellowstone and Central Idaho. So the wolves were starting to get down, and the reintroduction happened on top of them. But the 2 that were seen didn't survive long enough to reproduce. They weren't viable. They didn't have packs. They were just sort of passing through, just like we saw in Montana a lot prior to Kishnina and the successful breeding.
This is going to sound like a dumb question because I know it's probably not too challenging, but when they kill cows, how do they generally approach it?
You mean domestic cattle, not cow elk?
No, sorry. Yeah, when they kill cattle.
It depends on how many wolves there are, depends on the experience of the wolves. And every kill is different. I just remember in Minnesota, I had to go skin a lot of really disgusting maggoty carcasses of cows and heifers. If it's a calf, they basically eat it all. So there's not much to find. Mm-hmm. You might find an ear tag in a pile of scat or something. It's hard to prove they were there. But the big cow, you find bites. They're pretty effective predators. The hind, the belly, the neck, sometimes they're not efficient killers like lions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lions live alone because they can kill an elk alone. A wolf pack needs other members because they don't have sabers on 4 paws to help them hold and contain their prey. They just have teeth.
Do they key in on calving season for cattle?
I have always wondered why they don't more. I mean, they can. Yes.
Because it seemed like those wolves that were reintroduced in Colorado, just this past calving season, that's when they really started to get in some trouble.
Yes. And those wolves, before they were
Yeah.
transplanted, they were livestock killers.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if there's calves around and cattle, wolves, you will know there are wolves there if if you're going to have problems, you have them. But
Yep.
not every wolf is a livestock killer. And sometimes they might kill a calf or two and never have a problem. Sometimes they might come in and kill repeatedly until you remove the wolves. It really depends on the situation. And it kind of depends on how the rancher is managing their livestock herd. Do they have a herder out there? Do they have guard dogs? Are they turned out in a national forest on a grazing lease in May and then they're not picked up till October? Nobody looks at them. I mean, it really depends on the management of the stock a lot.
You just said something that I can't remember what the hell you were talking about. But it caught my attention. Oh, I know. Can one? I guess what I was kind of getting at. Can one do it?
Yes.
Effectively?
Depends on if you're talking, or can they kill one adult cow effectively?
Yeah. Can one wolf kill one adult cow? Do you ever see that?
It'd be tough. The cow would probably have to have something wrong with it.
Okay.
But it's usually more than one.
And you just get a hold of it and hang on to it.
Basically, yeah.
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 When did you say that Colorado put in known livestock killers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Explain what that means and if that's like
You're
fixed,
nodding your head.
is that fixed behavior? Do you feel like it's hard to unlearn that?
What I would say is if I wanted to reintroduce wolves with minimal problems, I would seek wolves that have only had wild meat. It's like the wolves that were introduced to Yellowstone in central Idaho were taken from Canada, where they had never been exposed to livestock, but they had never been exposed to buffalo either. I mean, they're pretty good at killing bison now. They had to learn it because they're very formidable. I wouldn't want to try and kill a bison with my teeth. But so I think, I don't know all the background of why they chose those wolves. They probably had a shortage of supplies and a shortage of time to get the job done, and they had this opportunity to get those wolves. They weren't all livestock killers, but the ones that are causing the problem now had a history before they were put there.
What is the I haven't followed it as closely. What is going on with the ones they put in Colorado? Like, how has that gone? How many and what are they doing?
Oh boy, to be exact numbers, I couldn't tell you. I'm not that involved, but there's a male, I forgot his number. They put him in and he's paired with a female. They had at least one pup, and I saw in my news feeds this morning, they've seen 3 now. 3 pups in this particular pack, but they had only documented 1 up until yesterday or whatever. And they were put in at the end of the year, like December or so, and they started killing livestock in April, I believe it was, when the pups were born. And they're now debating how are they going to manage the situation. They, no matter what CPW does, they aren't going to be a happy winning outcome, because if they remove all the wolves and kill them all, they're going to have the wolf protectionists screaming at them. If they don't do anything, they're going to have the livestock growers screaming at them. If they take, I actually had this conversation with a journalist yesterday. He says, well, how about if we just take 1? Say we know the male's been a livestock killer. Can the female survive long and protect and feed those pups without help? And I said, well, I can give you 2 examples. In 1982, when Kishnina had her first litter of pups in the Flathead in 50 years, her mate was killed in June, and those pups were 7-8 weeks old. And she
killed how?
He was killed accidentally by the grizzly bear trap people. He was caught in a grizzly bear snare, and he subsequently died.
Okay.
Accidental death, and still just as dead though. So the female had, so
doesn't do him much good.
Didn't do him. It's kind of like got your dog, right? Anyway, the female had 7 pups to deal with, and you raise kids and you raise dogs. You know how much food they start to consume as they become teenagers? Oh my God, talk about a full-time job, trying to feed 7 growing pups that are 50, 60 pounds by fall. And I thought, they're not going to never make it. They all made it through winter. We were seeing tracks of 8 wolves in the snow. So there's one example. The other example was, so that was keeping the female remaining. And then in the 9 Mile, in the early recolonization, those wolves got to 9 Mile, Montana on their own near Missoula. The male and female had pups. The mother was poached over Memorial Day, which is pretty early. So those little guys were maybe 4, maybe 5 weeks old. They were probably still drinking milk from mom. but they're already getting regurgitated food, certainly. So it only had the male to raise a whole litter of pups. And Mike Jimenez, who was studying them at that time, and Bart O'Gara University. Do you know Bloody Bart O'Gara? He's passed now, but he was the most
Bloody Bart?
The most voracious hunter I know. We loved him. He was a university faculty. We called him Bloody Bart. I could tell you stories. Whatever he shot, he would kill. So they had permission to go shoot deer or pick up roadkill to supplementally feed those pups because they were fully endangered. This would be like 1988 or so.
Yep.
To do anything. Fish and Wildlife Service was mandated under the ESA to do what they could to keep them alive as an endangered species. So they got these permits to go do that. That male raised those pups without a female, and they all survived. So yes, wolves are incredibly resilient. So then this journalist asked me yesterday, so should they take the male or the female? I'm like, oh my God, you're asking me a Sophie's Choice question. I can't tell you. And, we talked about it at length. And starting with 2 wolves, adults, that have both been killing livestock, and then you're going to take one wolf away to try and hopefully minimize it, you might be causing more of a problem because the remaining parent now has the burden solely of feeding hungry pups. And maybe it's going to kill more livestock because of that.
And those pups are going to learn to do it too.
Yeah, this is the problem. So I just think maybe thinking ahead a little bit ahead of time may have headed this problem off. But it's amazing to me that all those wolves they put out, they only had 1 reproducing pack. You think they would have had more. But this is a problem. Colorado.
How many did they put down?
10 total, I think.
And then are all 10 still alive?
One of them got killed by a mountain lion, which is kind of ironic. It's usually the other way around.
Yeah.
But I'm not. There may have been another one that died somehow.
A mountain lion got one. I think I knew that. Maybe I forgot it.
But I think most of them are still there.
And they formed 1 reproducing pack.
Yeah, it's surprising to me because they did it before breeding season. And then they'll be reintroducing more wolves. And of course, you heard Washington State is now refusing to give them more wolves. It's becoming this huge political.
Yeah,
but they got. I thought they got them from the Nez Perce, didn't they?
They got them from Oregon originally.
Yeah.
And one of the,
but not the state.
It might have been the Nez Perce that originally said yes, we'll contribute too, but that they just said we're not doing it.
Right.
Oh, hold on.
This was
so
just
how did
in
they
the
get
last
the ones
week
they had
from Oregon? I think from the state. Yeah.
From the state.
Oh.
But wasn't the new ones? Weren't they going to get the next batch from Washington? Wasn't it? Washington?
I think it was.
Could have been Oregon.
It was a tribe. I'm
tribe.
not sure where,
it was a
but
tribe,
that whoever it was just said nope. We're out. We're not doing it.
What is the argument to not let them have them?
Politics.
I'm sure.
Well, explain the politics.
Don't know.
You know it's politics, but you don't know what politics.
I should run for office.
She doesn't study politics, Steve.
I'll look it up.
So I'm just saying every decision made about wolves is based on politics. It's not based on biology. So why?
But of course.
Yeah.
Because biology is largely politics. When people say I don't want it to be political or so political, everything's political.
Everything is political.
There's nothing that's not political.
Right. Right.
I mean, every decision is political.
I know.
Creating national forests was intensely political.
Yeah.
What's not political? I mean, most actions are taken by elected representatives in this country.
Or appointed.
Appointed by elected. I'm just saying everything is political.
Yeah, I know. We don't have to go there.
No, I mean, but it's I don't know, earlier I had a headache and I took 2 ibuprofen that are 250 milligram ibuprofen. The fact that you can go buy 250 milligram ibuprofen is, I don't know the history on it. That's probably political.
Oh, no doubt.
You know what I'm saying? It's
So I would guess that because the Colorado reintroduction has had a lot of problems, the Native Americans
say that. I'm sorry.
And the Native Americans are probably saying, we just don't want to deal with it. So I was telling Janis, was asked to write a document for the National Wildlife Federation about wolves returning to Colorado. And it's basically called Lessons Learned from Everywhere Else that Colorado can use as a template for reintroductions.
Okay.
It's 60 pages long. It's on the Colorado Parks and Wildlife website.
Is that an addendum in your book?
No, it's not.
You didn't staple it into the end of your book?
No.
Maybe you can read the audio version of that when that comes out.
Oh my God. Anyway, it laid out all of the problems that challenges people have had elsewhere, whether wolves are coming back on their own or reintroduced, how agencies, federal and state, dealt with them, how local communities dealt with them, how conservation groups and ADC, or animal, it's no longer that now, it's Wildlife Services, work together sometimes or not. Just all these things. There's a template. There's nothing that needs to be reinvented about wolves being on the landscape. It's old hat.
Mm-hmm. So this is pretty interesting, the Colorado thing.
Yeah.
They were going to get them from the Colville Nation, 15 of them.
That's Washington.
In Washington.
Mm-hmm.
The Colville Nation said no because Colorado Parks and Wildlife wouldn't agree to give the Southern Ute tribe like management over wolves on the Southern Ute tribe's land.
Oh.
Political.
So out of tribal solidarity.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's an interesting point. Thank you for that clarification. I knew it had something to do with people, and I knew it wasn't. Yeah.
I bet it had something to do with people.
Always.
I want to get back into some of this, but I want to ask you another question that Corinne highlighted. It's a good one. You're familiar with with grizzly bears. You're familiar with the distinct population segments.
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of like looking at part of this whole idea is with grizzly bears is being like, okay, when we're talking about grizzly bears being on the landscape, where could they actually be? Like what areas could actually support bears, right?
You mean, okay, ecologically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a handful of other things, but I was going to bring up that there's a distinct population segment that doesn't have bears, but it could.
Where?
It's the Bitterroot.
The Bitterroot
Selway. Well, they've taken pictures
there.
of, they're getting there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there was at a time there was talk of putting them there.
Yes.
Okay. So if you were gonna, maybe I set that up the wrong way. Let me skip all that crap about the DPSs. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, if you were gonna
make a map,
yeah.
Of the United States, all of it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Diane, go in and color in the areas where you think there's a chance of having viable wolf populations. Meaning there's enough habitat, enough wild food, low enough chance of intense friction, right? How would you start to color that map?
Well, the last qualifier you just put on is the deciding factor for everything. I mean, there's.
You think so?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, so historically, wolves had the widest distribution of any mammal in the world, except for humans. I mean, they live from the Arctic to the desert. They live in every biome, every habitat. They can eat anything. They're habitat generalists. They're food generalists. They're like a 100-pound coyote that way. So they can live anywhere. I mean, they did. I mean, they covered the entire United States. So where could they live? They would live anywhere where us humans will tolerate them. And they're trying to get back. I mean, wolves are showing up in Illinois and Missouri, and, they just get shot. But they would be there. I mean, they would find a way to live on Central Park if we didn't kill them. They'd be eating poodles and whatever out there, but there's not, who knows? So squirrels.
RFK Jr. would have to lay a dead one of those on the park trail.
So that's a hard question because they would live everywhere. So we don't have to color in a map because I just color in everything.
Okay.
I mean,
until you get to that last qualifier.
Yeah, then you have to constrict it. So the wolves has shown us now in Montana. Anyway, let's pick Montana because we're all sitting here thinking about Montana. So wolves basically live in the western 1/3 or 1/4. And they've been doing this for decades now because that's where we tolerate them. But they keep showing up at Miles City and Ekalaka, and they get shot, and they don't make it. That's not an ecological issue at all. Mm-hmm. They would live there. They did. So I don't know.
Well, they did under different circumstances. Okay,
right.
let me requalify.
Okay.
Let me requalify because it's going to throw out. Did you say Cleveland earlier? Or did I make that up?
I didn't hear Cleveland.
You made that up.
You said something.
Missouri, she said. Illinois.
Let me redo my qualification.
Okay.
And not live on that somehow we make this deal Humans can't kill them, but they can't eat any human-generated food sources.
Cool.
Now, hit me.
There would be nowhere. No, I'm serious, because the only pack that I'm aware of in Montana that has never come into contact with livestock is the one up in northwest corner of Glacier National Park. And there is livestock in the southern portion of the North Fork, or there was. Ladenburg sold his stuff. But other than that, they can always come into contact with people who are raising sled dogs, people who have llama farms, people who have livestock, chickens, whatever. Just because we've taken over all of the wildlife habitat.
Could they make a go of it without causing too much trouble in like Maine, New Hampshire, like the upper?
Yeah, I'm not going to give up
Northeast?
on this map idea.
I can
It
see
seems
that.
like Maine. There's certainly plenty of whitetails there, right?
They'd have to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, stop being so obstructionist.
Somebody just get out the map, get out the marker.
You understand what I'm trying to ask.
No, I don't actually. I'm not.
If Steve cut a semi full of wolves loose in Maine,
Yeah.
Where can moose? Okay, let me say this.
Okay. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I just don't
You're
understand
going to color
you.
in the country of
Okay.
where, however you want to put it, man. Where could you visualize? Where do you think when the dust is settled in 100 years? And don't hit me with like, well, you know, is there a zombie apocalypse or
No.
like in 100 years?
Yeah.
Where are wolves?
If they lived where there weren't human conflicts.
No. Forget all those.
Okay.
Meaning
New direction.
Yeah, meaning it appears that it wound up being that northwest Montana was a suitable place for wolves,
Yeah, it is.
right? It wound up being that the northern Great Lakes,
Yeah.
the northern third of Minnesota, the
Yeah.
northern third of Wisconsin, the northern third of Michigan wound up being like a pretty good, like
It is.
from the wolves' perspective, a
Yeah.
good place for wolves.
Yeah.
What are the chunks that are probably like that that don't yet, but could?
It's hard to answer because
No.
I'm not avoiding. I'm just saying they go everywhere and they get shot. They go to eastern Montana. So I would color in eastern Montana. They don't make it. 100 years from now, they're not going to make it either. So I'm at a loss. I'm not trying to avoid it. I'm at a loss how to answer it. They would live in Illinois. They would live in Missouri because there's plenty of places where there's enough habitat for them. For habitat, all they need is some place where they find large hoofed ungulates. They don't get shot by people, and they have a secure place to raise pups. There's plenty of places throughout the country like that.
Mm-hmm.
do you think we've reached, like we've filled in the areas that
Carrying
people
capacity.
are going to, that people are going to tolerate? Like they're where they are now, and they're probably not going to be in a lot of new places.
I disagree.
No, I'm asking, like, will there, like, are they where they are now, and that's probably all the space they're going to get?
I think there will be more wolves expanding across Montana, certainly. I mean, they're showing up in the snowies, and they're showing up all over. And if they can get a foothold and have a pack, then at some point, if you're hunting and trapping them, there'll always be a few remaining. But the stronghold is the western portion because it's mountainous, because they're not seen, because there's less road access, because there's the Bob, the Glacier Park, the Scapegoat Wilderness. Those are all those things that these wolves need to live. I don't see that. There's a lot of places that are very wild across eastern Montana. I bird hunt, antelope hunt. But there's always a conflict there. There just always is, with livestock, with hunters, with whatever goes on. And I'd love to hear what you think. So in terms of mapping, right now wolves are all the way through Minnesota. You got wolves around the Twin Cities now. You don't know, maybe you don't know that, but they're filling into southern Wisconsin. They are moving south. It's a really slow wave. Nobody's reintroducing them. I got to point that out. It's on their own, and they have been making it to the other states but get killed. So because I don't kind of totally maybe get your question, or maybe I'm less optimistic than you. Where do you see them going where they aren't? Oh, Utah would be a place. Utah, Nevada.
Well, it's funny you say that. It's funny you say Utah because I was at an event. I was at an event this winter, and Utah's governor spoke at the event. Huh. And Utah's governor made a pledge to the audience that there would be no wolves in Utah. And I remember thinking, I don't know that that's your call.
Yeah, what he mean by that? Or,
He means
or
Colorado. They
threaten,
ain't,
you
they
know
ain't
what I
letting
mean?
them in
He
from
was
Colorado.
saying, in addressing the audience,
Yeah.
which was an audience of people that do a lot of work for big game habitat improvement, right? Bighorn sheep, mule deer, whatever, putting ungulates on the ground, putting game animals on the ground. He made a pledge that there will be no wolves in Utah. And I remember thinking,
Like, don't worry, hunters. And
yeah, but I remember thinking, well, the way it sits now with federal protection, that's not really your call. And I don't know what, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't know what tools you have at your disposal.
So I get that what you're saying, but that agrees with what I say, because wolves have made it to Utah. And we had a wolf go from Yellowstone, go all the way to the Grand Canyon and started on its way back. A collared wolf from Wyoming, from Yellowstone. And they got shot on the way home. They get shot. I don't know how to better tell you, but they just get
So
killed.
maybe when he said that, he was just saying, if they come,
We
it
kill
wasn't
them.
that he's going to do something.
No.
It's just that if they
That's
come,
exactly
someone's
why
going
I
to
was
shoot
asking
it.
that.
But I think
That's what he's threatening. Yeah.
People will kill them.
I
They
think
won't-
what you're saying too, though, is that, I mean, there are areas of the country that have, other than Northwest Montana, that have sufficient habitat
Oh, yeah.
security. Like in 100 years, I would imagine all the way down the spine of the Rockies, right?
Mhm.
Over maybe from the Cascades down. I don't know. Do they go down the Sierras? Like
They have.
like
well,
that's what
my question. Is it seems
California.
like California would be maybe a little more tolerant.
Well, they have a
They
bunch
already
now.
are. I mean,
They
there's
have,
wolves there now.
Oh,
like
they have
six
breeding?
packs or something.
Oh,
They've
okay.
got
And
quite
And if
a
I had
few.
asked you my question 20 years ago that you're trying to like dodge and obfuscate,
I'm not dodging.
if I had asked that question 20 years ago, would you have said Lake Tahoe?
I think wolves have a good chance of being in Utah, except people kill them. So I don't know if that's a yes or a no.
That's a yes.
Okay. And I'm really trying.
You might not know it, but it's a
not.
yes.
I'm not squirming. I'm not uncomfortable. I'm just saying, I have lived with wolf killing for so long, and where they're going to be tolerated is where they're at. And wolves getting in California is great, but they're going to start killing people's pets, and they're going to be not tolerated as well.
But what about like the wolves? If the Colorado plan goes as they, you know, some people would like it to go, they're gonna push into New Mexico and Arizona.
Yeah.
So my question is, what happens to those Mexican wolves then?
So I love this question, and Hefferfinger and I will disagree on this. So
Can one of you make the question really clear for people? Because I think a lot of people aren't going to understand what you're
I think
getting
she's
at.
probably the better.
Yeah. Do you mind why we're even asking that? Like what we're talking about?
So as I explained about the Mexican wolves, they are a unique subspecies. It's the only population really that's got its separate subspecies classification for protection, other than the red wolves, which are a different animal. So they come from a very unique gene pool of 7 founding members. They're trying to protect that gene pool. So if you read, I mean, every time a Mexican wolf starts to go north, it disperses like a wolf is going to do. They live by their feet and they go north. They go and catch them and bring them back. They don't allow them.
They do?
Oh, yeah. They don't allow them to travel out of the recovery area.
What?
You can Google it up if you want, but they don't allow it because
I think Heffelfinger mentioned that too.
Hold on, if one of the Mexican
I'm not
wolves
lying to
strays
you.
out of Mexican wolf area, they fetch it and bring it
Yep.
home?
Yes, it's a defined zone. And so because number one, that was the promise early on with the plan, but they've expanded the Mexican wolf recovery area slightly, but they don't want those wolves to mix with other gene pools. And those Colorado wolves will eventually make it down to Four Corners and come down, and they will approach and get in, I would assume, get to the Mexican wolf population. And then what are people going to do? They're going to start killing one wolf subspecies to protect the other one? I mean, you've had some really good genetic people on your programs. I've so enjoyed their discussions. If you were trying to preserve a rare species with a unique genetic pool that was highly inbred, like the Iowa Royal ones were, and then they all went to extinction because they were too inbred, wouldn't you want to have some gene flow from the most similar population adjoining and bring in new genes?
Because historically, there was that back and forth, right?
But even though there was all connected all the way to Mexico, to central Mexico, they were still had unique genetic markers because they have a different habitat than the rest of the wolves. It's a different habitat. So they are been isolated on their own way. But that's my humble opinion. I'm a lumper, not a splitter. And I think it would behoove Mexican wolves to have some new gene flow. And I am not in maybe a majority opinion, but I think people who have genetics background would agree. It's going to happen. They won't be able to stop it.
Well, sounds like they will maybe try.
They will try. They're already trying. They do move all these wolves back every time they go out of the recovery zone.
How are they getting them?
They catch them. Every one of them's collared just about. So
I had no idea.
And also, when a wolf is in an area, you usually
Reminds me when you have
see
like a
them.
little baby and like you put the baby in the middle of a room and the while later it crawls away and you go get it and set it back.
Have they thought about it?
Set it back in the middle of the room.
Get an invisible fence, right? I mean, that's how we deal with dogs wandering.
I don't think that would work for them. But anyway, and when wolves go to an area, they leave scat. They kill things. People see them. Everybody's got trail cameras. Everybody and the brothers out looking for the biggest elk or whatever. You see them. You see them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know they're there. They're not small and sneaky like lions. They're just not. They instead of sneaking around and hiding in rock crevices, they come into town in Harleys. I mean, wolves are big, noisy animals.
That's a T-shirt. That's a T-shirt.
There's two. I want to talk about just to give you a little taste of what's coming.
Okay.
I want to talk about mountain lions.
Okay.
Difference between mountain lions and wolves.
Yep.
I want to talk about why wolves don't kill people.
That's a good one.
But first, I want to talk a little bit more about Colorado.
Okay.
Crystal ball it for me, and you're totally excused. Like this is just crystal ball land. This is if you had to like make a guess.
Yeah.
What is give me a time frame. 20, what's going on in 20 years in Colorado? Just take a wild stab. And I'm going to announce Diane Boyd is taking a wild stab. This is not an academic exercise. She's taking a wild stab. 20 years. What's the landscape in Colorado? What's going on?
People will still be fighting whether wolves should be or should not be there. And despite our human intentions, they will continue to expand their populations and fill up appropriate habitat in Colorado. And they will have to kill some for killing livestock. And the other ones that aren't killing livestock will continue to find habitat and reproduce. And I think there'll be more wolves.
So it'll be Montana 20 years after 1996.
What about hunting season? You see that happening eventually?
Hunting for wolves?
Yeah.
I think that when you get enough wolves to create social tolerance, hunting season is a good idea. Is probably not such a good idea for individual wolves, but in terms of creating tolerance on the landscape. And I think you have to give the tools to livestock producers that they can take care of problems themselves. I mean, that's what they did in Montana early on. I just say follow the model that worked in Montana. It's worked pretty well. I mean, we went from one wolf to 1,000 wolves pretty quickly.
And then in your crystal ball, can you extend that crystal ball scenario to the Mexican gray wolf? They're all making love and they're just mixed in together.
Should have Heffelfinger here too. So
well, yeah, but this isn't what you want to happen.
No,
or
it's
should
what I
happen. This is
foresee.
this is just your guesswork.
people will still be fighting over Mexican wolves, and Mexican wolves may hit. I'm just trying to think. They may hit a critical mass where they're not all collared, and then some of them will escape beyond the geofencing of their allowed recovery zone and begin going elsewhere. But if they continue to heavily handle and manage the wolves and collar everyone, that well, they're not all collared, but manage its significant portion population, it's going to be really hard for those wolves to sneak through. But that's going to be, and I just think the wolves from the north will come down and start integrating. I'm hoping they will.
Mm.
And I think Mike Phillips would disagree with that too. But the other people I know, biologists, we talk about this. It's like, yeah, let them blend. Let's see what happens. It's sort of like this animal of the Northeast, the coy wolf dog thing. Nobody really knows what it is, but that animal has made a really successful living. It's found a niche that was partially formed by what we tolerate and how we modified the landscape. So this animal that lives there now is doing really well. Well, Mexican wolf, gray wolf mix, probably be the same way. At least they'll have more genetic variation. They probably won't go extinct due to inbreeding.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? But you asked my crystal ball. I think there will be more wolves. I think they will fill in more places, and there will always be the battles to have them on the landscape. Always.
I feel like how there's sports betting. Mm-hmm. I feel like there should be a way that you could that we could run like a bookie thing, and have Colorado wolf betting.
I mean,
You can bet on the.
you can bet on anything though.
Yeah.
I mean,
You can bet on the
CWD.
these days,
presidential
I wouldn't be
elections.
surprised if you could get odds on
That'd be great.
Colorado's wolf population in 10 years.
Yeah, people could make like bets, and you could win money and lose money.
And I think too, the more radical people get, I think it will cause more people to feel sort of move towards the middle. Like this fellow over in, where was it, Daniel, Wyoming, who ran over the wolf with the snowmobile this winter. You must
Yep.
have read.
Oh, yeah.
And he crippled it so it couldn't get away. And then he ties it up and brings it into a bar. All of this is illegal, which is a minor thing, but it's really immoral. And he brings it into a bar and people are laughing with it and getting their pictures taken in and finally hauls it out back and shoots it. Well, that's just one animal, but it had huge ripples throughout the country. And that's affecting wolf policy because of one guy's action. And I think those people that maybe didn't really care about wolves or maybe disliked them somewhat moderately see that is not fair chase. That is not acceptable to me as a hunter or a human being. And we have to put brakes on that. I kind of see the more radical people get, I'm hoping that people come to the middle more. That's my hope.
Why don't wolves kill people? Because they do in Romania.
I've wondered that for a long time. Well, sometimes. Come on.
So
Steve.
it's not more common there.
No.
But there's all those like crazy old stories about. None of that's true.
So, in my book, I could read you a little paragraph about statistics, but
Please.
do you want me to find it? I'll have to look for it for a moment. When you're talking, I'll look for it. But wolves have occasionally killed people. In modern times, documented. Kenton Carnegie was killed up in northern Saskatchewan in the 80s, early 90s. He was at a remote camp, and these wolves were coming into the dump. So think dump bear,
Yeah.
not afraid of people. And he went out one evening alone with his camera, and he was found the next morning, I believe, and he had been killed and partially consumed, and it appeared to be wolves. There was wolves and bears both feeding on him, but it looked like the wounds were wolf probably. So that's one guy. And then there was a woman jogger in Alaska who was jogging, and she was attacked
Remember
and
that?
killed.
Yep.
I don't think she was consumed. I don't remember on that, but it was definitely predation. They killed her. And there's been a few, I guess, attacks, encounters of wolves that have been habituated, especially like on some of the islands off of British Columbia and Washington, where people kayak and they're feeding wolves out on the beaches, and the wolves get friendly and they come in and bite somebody in their sleeping bag because they don't. Stuff like that. Algonquin Park, habituated wolves. That becomes a problem. So those are the cases that I know of. And then Mark McNay wrote a really long document published. You could Google his name, Mark McNay, of all the wolf encounters that he could find that were verifiable. Olden days, a lot of wolves were rabid. I shouldn't say that. A lot of the encounters with wolves that had bitten were rabid. Okay, that happens with every species, bats, foxes, it doesn't matter. But if you look at what other predators attack humans, people are killed every year by black bears, grizzly bears, some deer, some elk, mountain lions, coyotes. That's not true with wolves. And so you say, why don't people kill wolves more often? Oh my God.
Why don't wolves kill people?
I'm sorry. Right. That's what I meant.
And there, I think it's an interesting question because they could.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I look at any of us in this room. If one of us was out in the woods by ourselves and a pack of 8 wolves came along, we'd be toast.
Yeah, I could handle 3, but 8.
Probably
Yeah,
not.
I
with a
mean,
bow.
domestic dogs kill all kinds of people.
Yeah.
It's like
they could, right?
Yeah.
So what is your hypothesis as to why not?
My thought about that is, well, first of all, when we domesticated dogs, we changed the gene pool to have the dogs here. But
He's on my foot right now.
okay, I'll make sure he doesn't pull any cables. Over the course of time, when we started domesticating livestock about 11,000 years ago, we changed our relationship with wolves. Prior to that, it wasn't much. There was no reason to have conflict. And a matter of fact, I talk about some archaeologists, some ancient people who study wolves and anciently. Their theory was that humans in primitive times would watch wolves hunt successfully. So wolves and humans live in the same family structure, group of animals that are related usually. They would watch them hunt, And they ended up learning that if they could follow the wolves, they could steal meat from them. So they would watch the wolves, and when wolves picked out something, then the wolves, early humans, could go over there with their atlatls or spears, drive the wolves away, take the meat they wanted, and then leave, and then the wolves clean up the scraps. This was their hypothesis. So it was no way a synergetic or altruistic relationship. It's brute survival, but they sort of collaborated. And out of that, eventually, we learned that we could make dogs, I guess. But I think over time, once we start to domesticate animals, especially livestock, those wolves that were aggressive towards people were weeded out and killed. And I think that gene pool has been so heavily selected against. I think the behavior is still there. That's the only thing I can think of, because how many people have successfully domesticated lions, made a different animal out of it, or bears, or coyotes, right? These other things that kill us, people haven't. And we've spent so much time competing with wolves with their livestock and killing them that I just think that aggression towards people is no longer there. And maybe with the crystal ball, maybe 300 years from now, when we haven't been killing wolves, maybe that'll change. I don't know. But it is an interesting question.
Just wanted to weigh in. Episode 466, dire wolves and ancient hunting dogs. We touch on some of what you just mentioned with Angela Perry.
And what did she say?
That
same thing.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that one up. I didn't hear it.
Where do they fall? Maybe this is a weird question, but where do they fall on the intelligence scale compared to like a bear or a mountain lion, or like would that play a role in their like understanding of how to interact with humans? Like, are they smarter than a bear? Or
the bear researchers would say, hell no.
Right.
But I can tell you, I mean, I've trapped a lot of animals in my life, everything from weasels to grizzlies. And the wolves are the hardest animal to catch. Bears are not hard at all because they don't need to be. They're the top thing and they eat everything. Wolves have had to learn to sneak around strychnine baits, guns. And because they're a social species, they have to communicate well. They have to collaborate. They're different. I mean, none of these other predators that we've been talking about are social and live in groups. And I believe that gives wolves a need evolutionarily to be high intelligence. They have to work. They think. I mean, you can look at your dog, which is kind of a challenged version of a wolf. I mean, they're not that good at anything, and they're incredibly bright. I'm trying to use the right political term here, right? But they're incredibly brilliant. I mean, if you look at what you can train a Malinois or a Border Collie to do, and the wolves are much smarter than that. They just are. So that's my humble opinion. But again, the bear researchers would argue that, and because you have to, I mean, we're looking at a human lens to value intelligence.
Right. That's really interesting, man. That's to say that a wolf is smarter than your pet dog.
Oh yeah. They don't have to be smart. We feed them. We house them. They don't need to be smart.
They don't have to kill an elk every couple days.
Right. And yeah.
It's like a wolf with a restrictor plate or something.
That's China.
Our dog is not an exceptional dog. It's totally fine. Everybody loves it, but it's not exceptional in any way. It used to, for whatever reason, would like to chew on rose bushes and chew on raspberry bushes. It liked for whatever reason, the thorniness of it.
Oh, jeez.
And I one time just took my kids out and we put a bunch of cayenne in the dirt around a rose bush, and she went up to it and got a nose full of that, right? And has never, ever gone near.
Nope. Same thing with, e-collars and training. And no, dogs are smart.
So when you think about getting hard to catch, a dog's like, dude, to make that connection, right? So you think of something being hard to trap, like you sting its toe one time and there's just something about that situation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the old timers, when you read the books, The Last of the Loners and The Last Renegade Wolves, and guys trying to catch them, the stuff they did to try and outsmart these wolves. Sometimes, one of the worst things I read was they would trap in this couple of wolves, the last ones in the Southwest, and they just couldn't catch the male. And so they ended up catching the female, and then they took her and used her for bait, and the wolf went in the next day. That was it. He was done.
Got it.
And they spent, kind of sad.
In Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing, he's trying to catch a Mexican gray wolf, which he then brings back across the border. But he winds up, he can't catch it. And eventually makes a set in his fire pit. Because he would see that a wolf would now and then come and sniff around. So instead of making normal sets, he'd like made a set in his fire, let this fire burn down, cool off, and then made a set in there. I think that's how he catches it. That's how he gets it.
I don't know.
Then he brings it back to Mexico because he can't bring himself to kill it. Like he's supposed to catch it and kill it, but can't. He brings it back to Mexico and it quickly dies anyways. That's how Cormac McCarthy.
That's the lesson.
Someone kills it anyways.
Well, that's a cheerful story. Well, I mean, when it comes to wolves, there's no good ends for any large carnivore in the wild. I mean, the end isn't good for them, no matter what it is, but they try and live a really full life, and most importantly, they try and leave their genes behind. And if they can do that, they've succeeded.
But you're saying they don't move to a golf course and just watch a lot of network television?
There was... Okay, this is not in my book, but my last couple of years of working, we got a call from somebody living in a gated community between Whitefish and Kalispell. They called up and said, we've got some wolf pups in our driveway. And it's like, oh, okay, great, thanks. And I'm thinking, it's coyotes.
Yeah.
They're living in this gated community in an urban area. So anyway, I said, we took some videos. I said, great. Can you send me the video? So they emailed me the video. And it's like, oh my God, those are wolf pups. No kidding. In their driveway next to their mailbox. And they're playing in the culvert that goes under their driveway. It's like, wow. So we go out there and talk to the other neighbors, and several people had seen them. And so this is a gated community with people with huge houses. They're all wealthy. They love wildlife. That's why they live there. There's huge amounts of green space in the community. There's whitetails everywhere because no hunting's allowed. Talk about nirvana for wolves. They're protected. They got endless food resources. No one's going to hurt them. So we tried to catch the adults. They're a male and female. Had no luck.
For what reason did you want to catch them?
Put a collar on it.
Oh, I see.
wanted to know what happened at the end of the summer.
Oh, okay.
So what happens? What's going to happen when they leave this, 10 square mile gated community? We couldn't catch them. They were so smart about people. We had them on trail cameras. Couldn't get them to step on the magic pan, the size, of an Oreo cookie, literally. And then after summer came and the wolves went out and they left and they have to disperse to bigger happy hunting grounds, 200 square miles on average for a pack. They just one by one got shot, gone. So, but they can't live in 10 square miles. They have to move on. But it was so interesting to me that those wolves set up in that community. Yeah. So, I mean, they will try to live
That
anywhere.
wasn't by accident.
I don't know. How smart is a wolf? I don't know.
Yeah.
Smarter than Yanni.
Can you contextualize that a little bit more about how there's no good ending for a wolf? Because I think we all in this room understand what that means when you say that. But I think that a lot of people out there when you say that, it almost sounds like you're saying, oh, they're all going to end up getting shot. But that's not what you're saying.
No, I mean, a wolf is a apex predator, top predator. It's always having to hunt. It's always having to compete for food. So they get... In Yellowstone Park, the largest cause of mortality is wolves killing other wolves, protecting their territory. They trespass and they get killed. Outside of the park, even when I was doing my work, when they were still protected, 85% of mortality is caused by humans. They don't live very long. Take a guess on how long. So if we put together the data from Yellowstone Park and Minnesota and Montana, take a guess on the average longevity of a wolf from the time they're detected, because some die in the den young. So by the time they're 4 or 5 weeks old and they're seen until they die, take a guess.
Annual mortality?
No, age, like average age.
Average age at which they die.
18 months.
I'm going to go 6 months.
4.3.
4.3. Did you read that, sir?
No, I didn't.
You're right on the money. 4.3.
I was going to go with 4.6, but then I hedged my bets when you thought you were going to surprise us.
Dr. Randall for the
4.3 what?
He gets the trivia question. 4.3 years.
Okay.
Oh, it's years.
Years. So most of them don't live long enough to reproduce.
What is the
Dr. Randall? Ding, ding, ding.
Oh man, I wish Spencer was here.
He's got a doctorate.
He does.
In an area out not.
So do I.
Not including Yellowstone, perhaps, but what is the survival rate of, say, a litter of 6 pups? How many of them will reach sexual maturity? Is it a pretty high survival rate?
If they make it to to like the second year, they do pretty well. The first year, when they go between a year and 2 years, when they're starting to do dispersal and they're starting to look around.
But the pups themselves,
the pups generally make it. Generally, when the time they're little till their first year, they do really well because they're all protected. They're fed until they get trapped or shot during hunting season, or if they get. Sometimes humans have introduced parvovirus and distemper into the environment, and if that gets into the litter, mortality is very high.
Do they ever do that thing that bears sometimes do, where a male will come in and kill?
No,
they don't do that.
Nope.
Yeah, I was going to ask, other than humans, what's killing wolves?
Deer, elk, avalanches. The wolves kill each other. Yeah, I just said that in Yellowstone. So like the first recorded mortality in Yellowstone Park, I was told, was a UPS driver killing a wolf when he ran it over. And I thought, can you imagine being that UPS driver? It's like, oh my God, I just killed a national icon. Can you imagine it? Think about it.
I hope FedEx is hiring.
So, and they get killed by lions. They starve. I did have one wolf die in an avalanche.
What about bears? The bears get after them?
They can if it's one-on-one. But when you got a whole wolf pack, wolves kill black bears. Wolves will kill a grizzly cub if they can, but usually they can't. But one-on-one, I think, wolves are pretty fast.
Do they go way out of their way to kill coyotes?
In places they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Yellowstone Park, they've filmed them digging up coyote dens and killing the pups. Pretty gruesome.
Do they got it in for red fox too?
No. So there's this, in the book. So trophic cascades, we're going to get in a little bit. And I just want you to know that before I wrote this book, or while I was writing this book, I ended up working with Jim Heffelfinger, Dave Osband. I mean, it was really a hell of a good team. I was asked to be the senior author for the latest. We did an update on everything known about wolves in North America. It ended up being 40,000 words long and an 800 reference bibliography. It was a scientific work. It was grueling. It was interesting, difficult. This was my antidote for writing this book. So, because this was more fun and personal, but the science is in that book. It's a major chapter. You can get it online. But I learned a lot. We had Dean Clough from Canada. We had Joey Hinton, who does the red wolves. We had Brent Patterson, who does the Algonquin wolves. We had Adrian Weideven, who does the Midwestern wolves. People from every every segment of the population. I learned a lot. So in terms of getting back, we all wonder, why don't wolves kill people more often? But what was the question? I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Foxes.
Yeah.
So trophic cascades. So they document in Yellowstone, like, this is big earth-shaking information that coyotes had kind of taken over the canid niche in Yellowstone and kept the foxes' population subdued. And then wolves came back and killed lots of coyotes. And then the fox population responded by increasing because wolves don't really care about fox. They're not really a competitor. And foxes benefit from wolves. They clean up kills. We documented that earlier in the North Fork years because when I arrived in the North Fork, we never saw fox track anywhere up there. The first 15 years, we had people out all winter tracking on the snow. We never saw a fox track. I never caught a fox in a trap. And then when the wolves started building up populations, I was collaring and studying coyotes at the same time. Mm-hmm. And the coyote population, as the wolves went up, the coyotes went down. And then we started seeing fox. I got fox standing on my property now. Fox are everywhere. Wolves are everywhere. Coyotes, not so much.
So a wolf sees that coyote and he just recognizes it as a competitor, you think?
Something to get rid of.
Yeah. And he sees a fox and he just doesn't get too worked up.
It's kind of a nuisance. It's a difference.
That's funny because I feel like I've heard people make that observation just in different parts of the West, like in Idaho specifically. Yeah. People say the coyotes have really dropped in numbers and we're seeing foxes now and we never really saw them before.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting too, because in Michigan, where I grew up, it was always fox. Like, trappers just targeted red fox.
Was that
that just when coyotes came in the early 90s, when they really exploded in that area, I mean, the fox vanished, man.
You need more wolves.
What's that?
You need more wolves.
They're to the north. Sounds from your thing. It sounds like they're coming.
Give it 20 years. A mutual friend of ours likes to use that as an analogy to humans, where he's like, a wolf likes to go around the landscape and go, that ain't good for me and mine, getting rid of it. And we're on the landscape going, oh no, let's bring in more wolves. We might have less elk or less this or that, but let's keep them around. And he's saying, like, why are we the only sort of apex predator that would tolerate or even think of having competition as like a good thing? And instead of saying, let's just get rid of all of them, like a wolf might do, so that it's better for it, for its species.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like wolf advocates, wolf lovers love all these things about wolves, but they don't like to see it in people. You know, if you're like, man, that could be a lot of competition. I don't want that here.
Just thinking like a
terrible.
wolf.
I have a question for you. So when Corinne called me, she said you have experienced increased enthusiasm, excitement, hatred, whatever. The wolf issue has been building still. Like we see it all the time in Montana.
I've seen this.
Well,
we talk about this.
You talk about wolves
every
a lot.
now and then on the podcast, and then people write it. I mean, the feelings are
just
run high.
feelings are running higher about wolves now than they were 20 years ago.
Well, no. I would say that feelings, whatever high running feelings there are high running only because of what's going on in Colorado, and that reignited the entire debate.
Okay.
But I would not say generally. Well, okay,
what about
there's another hot area.
Yeah.
Another hot area is in Minnesota, Wisconsin, my home state of Michigan, where I just came from and got a lot of earfuls about this.
Oh yeah.
Hunters are really disappointed in the collapse of deer numbers, and then the states not having any authority to come in and do any kind of wolf control.
Yes.
And there's a little bit of a question of like, how bad does it have to get?
Yeah.
And do we really need to like trade our deer hunting for wolves, and we can't seek a compromise?
Yeah.
And more of a balance. Them being like, I don't want to be apologetic about liking to deer hunt. I want to be able to deer hunt and have success.
Yes. So what are this? I mean, Wisconsin had a huge wolf season, and they really killed a lot of wolves. In Minnesota, what is the wolf season in Michigan? And
there's none because they got put back on the
It's
ESA.
seesawed
They're still
back
protected.
and forth.
Yeah, so now they're back on the list.
They've closed it. They've had it. They've closed it.
So we've had this discussion about should wolves be listed or not, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere where they've come back, all of the Midwestern states, some of the Western states, they have exceeded way beyond expectations of delisting criteria.
Yes.
For years on end.
Yes.
So what is the value of the Endangered Species Act if you don't follow the rules of the criteria? And I'm not saying...
I can tell you what it is. It's not anymore.
Yeah.
It is my favorite Animal Protection Act.
It's very valuable to the people who
That's how
use
it's
it
used.
to, create lawsuits.
They don't want to talk about the numbers. They don't care about the numbers.
So I've had lots of people ask me when I do public talks, do you feel wolves should be relisted? And I say,
relisted?
Well, like in Montana.
Okay.
Do you feel wolves should be relisted? They're delisted in Montana.
Yeah.
And then I say, okay, geographically, which area? Montana. And I say, well, I don't like to see dead bleeding wolves hanging off of tailgates, but they have exceeded recovery standards. There are approximately 250,000 wolves worldwide. There are how many whooping cranes, how many black-footed ferrets. And I can't say biologically that we have any reason to have Montana wolves or Midwestern wolves on the endangered species list where they're connected to Canadian populations that go into tens of thousands. On the other hand, do I like what I see going on with the management of wolves in Montana in particular and the very strong anti-wolf sentiments? No. But does it mean that they should go back on the list? No. So can people, through increased harvest, intensive harvest, knock wolves down from this about 1,000 now or 900 to 150, which is the trigger point at which the ESA says, ooh, you've now endangered this population and we're going to put them back on the endangered species list? It would be really difficult because right now people can hunt, trap, night shoot, predator call, dig dens. I mean, you can do almost anything with wolves for half the year.
But we've talked about this before. Like in
Yeah.
the case of Montana or Wyoming or Idaho, it would never be in the state's best interest to
Right,
knock
of
them
course.
back to that point, because then the feds would come back in and
Exactly. But what I'm saying is people are the pro-wolf public. I sit in the middle, but I'm obviously passionate about wolves. So the pro-wolf public thinks that by increasing all of these parameters to allow more I don't like the word harvest, more kill, that we're going to put them down to 150.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can't do that without poison. Because
that's the point you were getting to. Is
Right.
that even as liberal as it is here, for 6 months out of the year, we're still not able to knock them back that much.
Right. We've cut them back some. And I mean, like this guy in Wyoming, that just is disgusting. You shouldn't do that with an elk, with a bear, with a wolf. It shouldn't behave like that with a wild animal. But with the liberal seasons we've got, and this year they did increase their harvest. It was up to, I think, 286 for the last license year, which is a little more than the year before. But we've had years where there's been 300. The population isn't changing a lot. But on the other hand, using the method they use to estimate wolf populations through POM,
What's that mean?
Patch occupancy model. It's an integrated patch occupancy model. Occupancy models are designed to estimate occupancy where they are. They're not designed to estimate abundance or numbers. So they're using a model for not what it's designed to do. So I don't know that it's a real good representative. What I would say is I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's other factors to look at, like go to the Livestock Loss Board website. It's public information. For Montana or any agency, or the USDA, Wildlife Services, and you can look at the number of livestock losses by predator. They list them by predator or by death cause, and you will see, especially in Montana, the number of livestock depredations in Montana was less in 2023 than it was for the previous years. The number of complaints was less. The number of wolves taken for killing livestock was less. If there are wolves on the landscape of Montana and there's livestock, they will kill them occasionally. So I would say these other indices should be incorporated into the model, because I think when you're seeing less and less and less depredation, it's because there's less wolves, even though people are killed more this year. And if you look at the percentage statistically, it's probably not real significant, but maybe more people were out hunting last year to try and kill wolves because it was a milder winter. We don't know. We can't.
Did you say it was 286 that were killed, or it was 286 was the quota?
No, that was what was killed between shooting and trapping.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the current number. You can look it up. And that was just released. But there's many things to look at. But what I can say is there's adequate wolves, and I'd say there's adequate prey. And I was looking. Did you see that judge who just in Fergus County near Lewistown, several large landowners got together and wanted the state to kill 50,000 elk because the elk are taking over the private large landowners' habitat, and they don't allow people to come in and shoot them. So there are all these elk, and they wanted to have this power to kill 50,000 elk extra outside of normal hunting season.
50,000?
That was that United Property Owners thing.
Right.
Back BHA was
involved. BHA and Montana Sportsman's Alliance and all these hunting groups said, no, you have to create access. And I think if people are really concerned about elk numbers, because if you look at the tables, the statistics, there are more elk in Montana now than there's been in a long time. And in Wyoming, they're issuing unlimited number of elk tags in 2023, I believe, or 2024. It seems, from my perspective, you would know more, you guys deal with your hunting committee, it seems to be more of an access issue than it does a predator issue. And if I were a big part of a hunting conservation promotion group, I would be working on the access issue more and working with our legislators more and our governors more and letting them know, you know what? These rich out-of-state guys or whoever own these ranches, they're not letting us on. I would be really concerned about it. What do you guys feel about that?
I mean, I think that's in some areas that's the biggest conversation around elk numbers is you have you have elk that are learning over time. Elk are learning safe zones.
Yep.
There are big acreages where hunting's not allowed.
Yeah.
And there are big acreages where people have an objective of getting a couple big bulls.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want something to mess up those big bulls. They don't want people to push them off. They kind of like them during hunting season. They don't like them when they're doing crop damage. And they're reluctant to have Joe Blow running around on their place. And they kind of want the best of both worlds. They want individual access, and then they want state help. And what they don't want is a sign saying, "Come one, come all."
Right. They need more wolves. Just kidding. I'm just kidding on that. But you see, the problem, again, it's always humans. But if you look at the species responsible for killing sheep and cattle, it's number one, grizzly bears kill almost 3 times as many livestock animals as both lions and wolves. And lions generally kill a few more than wolves, but it's hard to confirm totally because
lions kill more livestock than wolves.
The confirmed kills. The hard thing is when a wolf kills a cattle or a calf or whatever, there's 6 or 8 of them feeding on it. So there's often not enough evidence left to determine which predator responsible. So there's a lot more probables for wolves than there are lions. But confirmed, it's more lions than wolves.
And that's what's killing, where you got wolves and mountain lions overlapping, what's killing most of the game?
Lions. Do you look at the Bitterroot elk study?
Yeah.
So it's surprising to me. So there's been 3 studies that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has done. And this is an agency that's not real pro-wolf, right? Let's just say. So they do these studies. And when I was looking at the research study plan and the results, I was shocked because I thought wolves would be the primary predator. But you can go on the FWP website, Google the data. They did 3 studies that were long-term, multi-region studies. One for moose, one for mule deer, and one for elk. And they looked at the populations of the game animals, 3 different areas over multiple years. And they put a lot of collars out and they looked at mortality. So in the Bitterroot elk study, you're probably all familiar, lions killed more. And when they increased the harvest on black bears and wolves, lions still, that had no effect. And the more, there were just lions killing everything.
And they found the same thing in Idaho. The lions are way out killing wolves.
Yes. And when they did the moose study, what do you think the number 1 killer of moose was? It won't be what you think.
Lions.
No.
Wolves.
Black bears.
No. It was
ticks.
Yes. It was climate and habitat.
Yeah.
Exactly. They killed, it was 56% of the moose mortalities documented they related to climate. That would be ticks, mostly probably ticks, and things related. Predation was a very small section of the pie. And I was surprised. Of the predation section, so humans killed almost the same percentage, almost as the predators, a little less. Of the predation section, it was wolves first, I think bears second, lions third, but wolves was slightly more. But yeah, it's the environment changing, the habitat
and mule deer's
changes.
got to be way lions.
Was lions.
Yeah.
So why do people want to keep increasing wolf
Because
harvest?
the lions were always here. That was kind of this thing that we talked about with Idaho is you had I'm going to butcher the numbers. These are not the right numbers, but it paints a somewhat accurate portrait. It'd be like prior to wolves coming into the Idaho Panhandle.
Yeah.
This is not the exact number, but it's not crazy. It'd be that lions are killing 30 out of 100 elk calves, let's say.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Something like that. But that had always been true. And everything about elk abundance and everything about what's statically normal, right? Just normal life, that was going on. And then something comes in and it adds 10. Okay. So now 40 out of 100 elk calves are dying from predation because there's this new additive thing. And socially and otherwise with the population, it winds up being that 10% tips a balance that we'd become used to. And so, people had seen it's always been normal.
Yeah.
And then now it's not normal no more. What happened different? This new thing. The baseline had always burned.
Yep.
Right? You'd always lost those 30.
Yep.
and you had an elk population that reflected that level of predation, and all of a sudden now you have an elk population that doesn't reflect that. It reflects something new, and it's going to be lower.
So you're saying all the wolf coming back is additive, none of it's compensatory mortality.
Man, I know the terms you're using, but I can't answer that.
So you're not seeing lion populations diminishing down to 20% of the elk calves, say instead that the wolves are now taking 10% that the lions would take.
It must have been additive, because how else can you explain the math? I mean, like, this is the thing that people have to accept. Like the really pro wolf people have to accept that this is true. And when they're kind of being honest, they acknowledge it. Meaning, on one hand, they like think hunters blow everything out of proportion, and hunters are like, oh, we're going to lose all of our deer and elk, right? And they criticize hunters for that. At the same time, they'll say, oh, if CWD is from having too dense of populations, wolves will help. And you're like, hold on a minute, I thought that you're saying that hunters are wrong and that wolves don't lower game numbers. Now you're saying they do? Or they'll say deer and elk are over browsing.
Right.
Wolves will help. It's like, hold on, let's back up, because earlier you told me it doesn't matter.
The way
that it doesn't matter for deer and elk numbers. So it does matter for deer and elk numbers, right? It's like, you can't argue, and you know this better than me, but you can't argue, like, in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, when wolves came in the mid-90s, there's no other word for it. Elk numbers collapsed.
They collapsed. But
in the panhandle of Idaho, elk numbers just like, there's no other word for what happened. They collapsed.
But do you know about the winters that the wolves came into Idaho? It was the heaviest winters ever recorded. The wolves came into Yellowstone.
Okay.
And 20,000 elk on the northern range of Lamar is not a normal range of numbers of animals that should be there. Anyway.
Okay.
I mean, you know all that. I think we talked about this last time. But the winters of 96, 97, that was the second winter they put in. I don't think you can sit there. Maybe you can, but tell me that 30 wolves are going to kill 10,000 elk.
No, it wasn't. I don't think that it was. I think that it was
over long term.
Yeah, it wasn't that year. It wasn't like the ones they brought in.
Yeah.
But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, you know it better than me. But is it not fair? Is it not fair to say that? Let's talk about the Idaho Panhandle.
I don't know about the Idaho Panhandle. I can talk about the Lamar pretty good though.
Okay. Wherever the Lamar.
Yeah, Yellowstone. Northern herd.
Okay. Bad winters or not.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That had, unless I'm wrong, that had the incoming wolves and the expansion of wolf populations.
They ate elk.
Had a big change on elk, because that's also, if we remember, we're all supposed to celebrate them for bringing the beavers back,
right?
Which has now been walked back and not true. So it did something to elk, right?
Yeah, and you could pull up the table, but the elk numbers fell off really fast in that hard winter. And like in Montana, in 96, 97, Carolyn Syme was doing whitetail deer study in northwest Montana, and 40% of the whitetail died winter die-off, and it had nothing to do with elk.
Okay.
So I'm just saying.
Nothing to do with wolves.
With wolves. I'm just saying.
Couldn't, like, in the case of the bitter, the way someone described it to me, I can't remember who, was like, the elk there could sustain like
so
a
much.
certain level of predation and maintain a certain number. But when you put the wolf on top of it, that was like just enough to be a tipping point to push them over the edge.
Or push them on a private land where people don't allow them to be hunted. That's what's happening in the Bitterroot.
But like in the case of like a bad winter, you stack wolves on top of that. Maybe the elk could have, you know what I mean? Like, it's just one more thing they've got to deal with.
So, I mean, I read the scientific literature, and I'm a hunter too, but in Yellowstone, there are so many factors. It's really, I would say it's unfair to say one is to blame. It's a huge puzzle with many factors. And since wolves come back, the elk numbers have definitely decreased. But I think they're actually at a better sustainable level. I mean, do you know in the 60s, they were in there gunning and killing elk because there were too many elk and there were not enough predators. They were shooting them like 1,000 a year or whatever. They don't have to do that anymore. There's, 6,000, 6,500 elk in the northern herd now versus 20,000. And it's kind of stabilized at that. And the wolves have stabilized at about 100. And they've switched to bison. A lot of their food value now is bison, which that was mind-boggling me. I'm not saying they aren't limiting. I'm just saying there's a lot of things going on. And I think the humans really got used. I've been on one of those late Gardner hunts, and oh my God, what a zoo in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because there were too many elk, they had to do that. Well, they don't do it anymore, and people are pissed off about it because I want to go down there and get my late Gardner hunt. Well, that is not a sustainable population to have people go in and kill starving elk in February. I mean, we can look at it any way you want.
Can we go back to our crystal ball in Colorado?
Oh, God, yes.
Was it a 20-year? We were talking about 20 years?
Yeah, 20 years.
Okay. Let me hit you with this.
Yeah.
Let's say there are 100 deer and elk in Colorado today. How many deer and elk are there in 20 years?
Due to?
Because of wolves.
Oh, because of wolves.
How many are left? There's 100 now.
Yeah.
100 deer and elk are in Colorado now. And you do your 20-year crystal ball. Where has that population settled out?
80 or 90, maybe.
Okay.
Might be 100. The other thing is people population. We keep growing in and building subdivisions.
That's not
well,
part of
it is
this.
part of it because people build on elk winter range. Look at the Paradise Valley, for God's sakes. They've destroyed a lot of elk winter range where the elk used to winter.
Well, that's where the wolves could do that tipping point there.
Yeah.
Again, because like Colorado's elk are like, in places their numbers are already crashing because of black bear predation on elk calves. And then you get like development of winter range and then a huge amount of recreation like hiking and biking and then you throw wolves on top of that and it's like,
you could look at it that way.
You know, what's going to happen?
I just look at what's going on in Montana where we've had wolves for 40 years. In Wyoming, they've had wolves for years. And elk numbers are higher than they've ever been.
Yeah.
So I don't know how, I mean, you could look at whatever end of the scale you want to look at. I'd like to kind of come to the middle. There'll be places where wolves can impact populations. Lions certainly have, bears have. People have, because we're building up into habitat that is absolutely critical for those ungulates in the winter. They don't have it anymore. So where do they go? They become victims to prey animals or they get hit on the roadway. My God, driving down from Livingston to Gardner in the winter is like slaloming through whitetail and elk everywhere. It's awful. So we could pick whatever data set you want to use, but they've coexisted long before we were ever in the landscape. That's all I'm going to say. And before, when Lewis and Clark came to this country with the West,
A lot of
wolves and grizzlies, and there was never more wildlife than there's ever been. Because we've changed everything, and we have an expectation to have it perfect. You're never going to have that.
When I encounter rabidly anti-wolf people, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll tell me how they want to go hunt in Alaska.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't like it, buddy.
Because?
Because it's 97% of historic wolf habitat is occupied by wolves. You wouldn't like it. There's no hunting there. It's got wolves. What's the hunt in Alaska?
Is that what you tell them?
Yeah.
Is that true?
No, of course it's not true.
Okay.
I'm demonstrating absurdity by being absurd.
Thank you. It's like, Steve, I'm shocked. Okay.
No, it's my favorite. I mean, I love it there. It's my favorite place to go.
That's good.
But I'm just saying, I point out to them, like, don't lay it on me that they're incompatible because tell that to, right?
That's that.
Everybody dreams of going and hunting in Alaska. It's like, well, let me tell you something. A lot
There's
of wolves
there.
Well, I was hunting moose there a couple of years ago, and we'd watch, how many did we see one night?
15. All black.
Pretty much every evening, 15 to come through.
Wow.
Right? So I'm just saying that perspective. And every time we talk about predators and every time we talk about wolves, I always feel the need to clarify like my perspective on it.
Yeah.
I think it is I think it's immoral to remove native species from native habitat. I just think it's like playing God in a way that however you want to conceive of God, it's playing God in a way that God would not agree with, right? It's like, it's immoral, I think, to eliminate species from Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing their tracks. I like hearing them. I like seeing them. I do not think they should be eradicated. I like to try to achieve a balance of holding a bunch of different people's interests in mind because it's the only way we're going to survive and live as humans. I think that as you said, I think that what's been achieved here in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, it's not perfect, but it's working. And I think you would alleviate a ton of the social stress in the upper Great Lakes if they were allowed to pursue a similar path with regulated hunting. I don't know anybody when wolves walked into Colorado, of the people I hang out with and associate with and hunt with and talk with all the time. When wolves showed up in Colorado, I don't know anybody who said to me, they ought to get down there with helicopters right now and find those wolves and kill them. No one said that to me. Right? With the reintroduction, I've had people basically say that if they could do that, they would do that. It was like, there's something about it that just burns people.
Of course.
They don't want to be. There's something about it that burns people.
They don't want it forced on them.
Because it's like there's a way that we accept things that we perceive to be natural, and there's a way people accept things that perceive to be something getting shoved down their throat.
Yep.
And wolves walking into Colorado, people kind of had a
Oh, they had like a doctorate degree in pushing that shit down their throats down there. I couldn't believe it when I read that stat of like, Grant County is where they released the first group, right? And I think that was one of the few counties that overwhelmingly voted against it. It was like a high 60s, maybe 70% against it. And that was the county they chose to, here you go.
But they couldn't reintroduce them into Boulder and Denver. I mean, that's where the vote was.
While we're on Colorado again, I think
That's
it'd be
a great
great.
point, man.
It'd be great to get your thoughts as, just a biologist with so much experience on the ballot box biology that they're proposing down there. And just, I guess, in general, what your thoughts are on ballot box biology and if you think that's going to be and even you can leave the mountain lion ban alone, hunting ban alone, but just in general, if you think that works as a way to manage wildlife in our country.
Well, obviously you feel strongly one way. That's quite a loaded question, but the way you put it, you'll read in my book.
Well, no, because the reason I'm interested is because I feel like you do sit in the middle and you connect with a lot of people that I would like to connect to, and I feel that we would probably land somewhere on the on the same end of the spectrum and want the same outcome. So I'd like to hear how you talk to people about this.
So I've never been in favor of wolf reintroductions anywhere because they come back on their own. And I feel strongly, we can never now test it because it's too late, but I feel strongly that there's a better social tolerance, just what you're saying, if they come back on their own, like they have done most places in the world and in the Midwest. But now that they're here, you can't go backwards. And wolves got to Oregon, Washington, Utah, Colorado, California through dispersal, but they were dispersed animals from a reintroduced population. So they will never be thought of as native either, which I think that's a shame. If we would have let natural recovery happen just like it did in Montana, like it started to do in Colorado, like it's done in the Midwest, I think we would be further ahead politically, but we'd have less wolves by this point in time. But how many years? I mean, they reintroduced those wolves to almost 20, 30 years ago now. Would we be at the level we're at now? Probably pretty close, because once wolves hit critical mass, they take off without the social baggage. That's how I feel. You asked. That's how I feel. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Well, I guess as someone that's worked with wolves, like, did you like having in your toolbox? I don't know. Did you ever consider yourself a manager of wolves?
Was never up at the top level. I've done some going out and putting out propane cannons and hanging flattery. Yeah, I've done some of that.
But you advise people that sort of set management strategies around wolves.
I've come and asked to be an anonymous commentator on various federal plans. Yes.
So is it nice to have in your toolbox hunting as a way to manage these animals?
I think socially you have to have it. I'm not a wolf hunter. I have no desire to ever have to kill a wolf. I don't. It's just not who I am. Is it a socially acceptable tool? Does it create social tolerance? That's what people are pushing and believing. And I think with reintroductions, that may be true. It's a tough one. Like I said, I don't want to shoot wolves. And I tagged lots of dead wolves on tailgates when I was working for Fish Wildlife Parks. They come in, I tagged lions and otters and martens and wolves. And I always ask the people the story. How did you get the wolf? Tell me the story of how you hunted it. That made a difference to me when I looked at it, dead wolf's a dead wolf. But when I heard if somebody said, It was amazing. I had an elk tag and I was out and I heard the wolves howling, and this wolf walked out and I thought, my God, that's a magnificent animal. I really want to have it. I want to have a pelt or whatever. I could understand that. And then people come in and say, hate these bastards. We should shoot every one of them in the state. That really was difficult. And when I think of that kind of management, that I feel doesn't do justice to us as hunters or biologists or to the wildlife itself. And I really think a big push we should have is working with the public on educating, I hate that term, on exchanging ideas with people what wolves are and are not. I think there's not enough information out there for average person who wonders, well, how many elk does a wolf kill a year, or are they impacting game? Put out all the information, unbiased, in a format that people can use. I don't care if it's Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation Bugle or Outdoor Life or whatever, Montana Magazine. Put it in a format that's available for people to read and understand. The Bitterroot Elk Study, they did. They put quite a bit of information out. But that fades away. The wolves are still killing all the elk. It's like, wait a minute, did you read the article? But people are biased because of their culture. So, I just think enough information helps calm down the flames on both ends. I am a believer in that. And I hate the term educate. I hate it when he says, we need to educate so-and-so about that. It's like, oh God, can we think?
You know what that means? That means I need to tell that person what I think.
That's right. That's right. But to exchange information.
Yeah.
That's what.
Well, the public needs to be educated.
No, I don't. I hate that term. And I heard agencies promote that all the time. But anyway.
Can I see your book?
My book.
I want to hold it up.
Okay. Dr. Diane Boyd. I'm teasing about Randall.
Yeah, you don't have PhD written on there.
Of course not, but it's in the back under the bio because I don't want people to see Dr. Diane Boyd and not buy it because of their biases. They just see it's Diane Boyd.
There you go.
That's a bias. Definitely.
Oh, they'd be like, oh,
I
tell me
definitely
about
have
it.
a
They'd be
bias
like, some
against
tell me
it.
about it.
Dr. Randall
Yeah.
never lives that one down.
They'd be like some Berkeley egghead telling me about wolves.
Exactly.
Diane K. Boyd, not a doctor. Oh,
There you go.
she's a doctor back here.
Yeah.
Diane K. Boyd, A Woman Among Wolves, My Journey Through 40 Years of Wolf Coverage. I haven't read it. I will read it.
I'll give you a personal copy.
I will read it.
Will
I
you
think people
sign
should
mine?
read it. And again, when we talked before, and I loved it. It's so good to hear your perspective on these things. I think a lot of what you're saying, I think what you're saying is going to be very challenging to people, no matter how they look at wolves. You offer a very challenging perspective because it doesn't fall in line.
It's the middle finger.
Yeah, it doesn't fall in line with the narratives that you would get depending on your culture. It's like you're offering a really educated, nuanced view of things that have come from being in the room for a lot of discussions over the year. I'm not like I can't say that I can't say that someone would be able to go and determine that everything you've said is exactly true or right, but it's a challenging, like you're offering a challenging, pretty gracious, highly educated perspective on how to think about predators. And I appreciate you coming with us and doing that.
Well, thanks.
And I hope people find your book and read it.
Thanks. When I wrote it, I was not allowed to put in scientific references or footnotes. I have my list at the end of suggested readings, but I wrote it so that anybody can pick it up, whether you like wolves or don't care, regardless of your outdoor experience. Anybody can pick that up and get something from it. And I don't preach. I tell through stories and I weave science and let the reader come to their own conclusions about certain aspects of wolves being on the landscape. So it's a different kind of a book, and I lived it. I lived these wolves. This is my story, and then it morphs into present time in 2023. And if you just like a good adventure story, there's a lot of stories. I could read you a short 30-second paragraph if you want.
Hell yeah. Let's close with that.
close with it. The opening introduction
Okay,
paragraph.
we're gonna close with this. So she's gonna get done. You're gonna go buy the book. We're just gonna end the show. Phil's gonna turn the machine off when it's done, but this will give you a taste of how it's written, and I'm looking forward to it.
This is probably 35 years ago. My pickup banged and rattled along the potholed inside road in the northwest corner of Glacier National Park. Boxes of wolf trap and jars of bait slid across the truck bed. I was in a hurry, my mind focused on the wolf caught in a trap somewhere ahead in the lodgepole pine forest. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed motion in my rearview mirror. I looked up to catch the glassy reflection of vivid yellow eyes framed by a wolf's black face looking over my shoulder from the back seat. How did I get here? Opening paragraph.
All right. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
You got to come back on
Diane.
soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Giannis, you got to keep your shoes on during this podcast. It's getting a little smelly in here.
You saved it until we turned the recording off?
Oh, I'm still recording.
Good, that's the outro.
Up before the dawn, that old coyote leads the way. One shooting star to wish us well. Beat the sun to breakfast and we'll lay it down to bed. Spend all day in that windy hell. Them cottonwood trees lost their leaves with every breeze. Masked the footsteps that I took. The only noise was wide like a library at night. Learn more from them trees before they're bugged. That fever makes you shiver. That fever makes you sweat. Wakes you up in the middle of the night when birds ain't up just yet. Sometimes you're burning up, sometimes you're cold and wet. 'Cause you ain't heard the fever quite yet. Darling, you ain't heard the fever quite Drove home through the plains, still combines pulling grains. Guess they're all out in them fields. Use your mouth less than your eyes, and you might just be surprised. That old river bottom yield, that fever makes you shiver. That fever makes you sweat. Wakes you up in the middle of the night when birds ain't up just yet. Sometimes you're burning up, sometimes you're cold and wet. 'Cause you ain't heard the fever quite yet. Darling, you ain't heard the fever quite yet. That fever makes you shiver. That fever makes you sweat. Wakes you